Chapter 767. Jingju understood what she meant after a moment of bewilderment. How should I write it? He asked instead of delving deeper into this topic. It was of course not a question about the writing technique. Zhong Lizi explained, there are two kinds of writing that are commonly used nowadays. One is the consciousness writing, which collects the fluctuations of your consciousness and then presents them in word. The problem with this method is that the reader's thoughts are out of control, and some messy fragments will appear in the words. The serious writers who have won the literary prizes like this method, but the commercial writers seldom use it, because it's too troublesome to modify it. Another reason is that the equipment for collecting consciousness is too expensive. What about the other method? Asked Jingjiu. Zhong Lizi took out a small object that looked like a finger glove from her room, saying, the other method is to use the remote sensing pen. Having said that, she demonstrated it to him. She put the finger glove on her right forefinger, and then it started vibrating rapidly. A line of words appeared on the screen of the computer without any errors or omissions. What's the difference between this method and using paper and pen? Asked Jingjiu. Zhong Lizi took off her gloves and put them by the computer, saying seriously, it's faster and cheaper than using paper and pen. Jingjiu thought that these mortals didn't have to pay attention to the things he didn't have to, so he went back to his room with the computer in his arms. Zhong Lizi pulled back her gaze from the tightly shut door and walked into the kitchen to prepare the dinner. The tasteless but healthy nuggets tasted awful even though they were served with tea. She would have complained if it were under normal circumstances, but she was so distracted that she didn't notice how she had swallowed those nuggets. Everyone's first book is about themselves. The story he was writing in his room must be set in that beautiful world, about the grudges and grudges of the upper class, and maybe the secret stories of the aristocratic clans. It might even be related to a young mistress in the priest clan. The girl with silvery hair thought that she would get a share of the money if the story became popular. She felt great about it. Perhaps it would be better if he was brought back to the upper class by his clan, but he couldn't bear to be separated from her, so he brought her back with him. Then, she thought, I'm an ignorant girl who covets wealth and glory. Thinking of these things, she brushed off the residue of the nutrition block on her hand, took out a tea bag, and made a cup of tea. She pushed open the door of the study and walked in. You'll definitely be a little rusty at the beginning. I'll accompany you for a few days and you'll be able to get used to it. Zhong Lizi placed the teacup on the windowsill and turned to Jingjiu sitting on the floor, saying concernedly, don't worry, well, have you finished writing? Her voice grew louder and louder, until it finally became a question of incredulity. At the end of the 7th volume, he saw those worship. Jingjiu turned off the computer after writing this line of words. He looked at the silver-haired girl and said, I'm not done yet, but that's it for now. Zhong Lizi had a bewildered expression on her face. She suddenly came back to her senses after a while, exclaiming, You're such a liar. It must have been written in advance. But where did he put it before he wrote it? It definitely couldn't be the Academy's intranet. He didn't have a wristband, and it didn't seem like he had a chip implanted. Jingjiu didn't know what in advance meant, so he didn't pay any attention to her. How do I publish it? He asked. Zhong Lizi hadn't recovered from the shock yet, saying, There's a forum on the Institute network. You can upload it every day after you've registered. Jingjiu knew what registration meant, saying, I don't have an identification mark, so I can't register. Zhong Lizi pressed while covering her face with her hands. What if you use mine? Jingjiu uttered after some thought. Zhong Lizi picked up the computer and operated it for a while. Soon, she had uploaded 20,000 words. Seeing her focus on increasing the number of hits, Jingjiu asked, Aren't you going to continue? Staring at the light screen, Zhong Lizi wanted to see who the first comment was. 20,000 words a day is enough, she replied casually. Jingjiu thought he would have to wait here for 100 days. Publish all of them, he said. Zhong Lizi lifted her head and glanced at him, as if she were looking at an idiot. Then, she found this idiot was too good-looking. She lowered her head uncomfortably and said, "If I publish it all at once, it'll be buried in the forum. Nobody will pay attention to it." Jingju wondered what the reason was. "Nobody will read it once it's finished," Zhong Lizi explained patiently. "It's not finished," said Jingju. "This story has only just begun." Seeing his insistence, Zhong Lizi suggested, "Let's make a compromise. How about 30,000 a day?" 500,000, said Jingjiu. Zhong Lizi said, 50,000, 100,000 is fine. Deal? Looking at her outstretched hand in front of him, and her eyes that were as innocent as a small animal's, Jingjiu reached out his right hand and clapped it gently when he thought of those guys on the Shinma Peak. Pointing to the computer, Zhong Lizi said, "Shall I read it first tonight?" Jingjiu nodded, thinking that he had to digest the knowledge of the number theory that night. Zhong Lizi returned to her bedroom happily after picking up the computer. The faint glow of the light screen leaked out from the crack of the bedroom door the whole night, and the sound of sobbing could be heard once in a while. The next morning, she walked out from her bedroom with the computer in her arms. Her silvery hair was messy, her eyes red, and her face haggard. It was evident that she hadn't slept the whole night. Jingjiu was reading the morning news while lying in the chair. Seeing her in such a state, he couldn't help but glance at her a few more times. "The writing is not bad," said Zhong Lizi in a casual manner after wiping her reddened nose with a tissue. Jingjiu uttered, to express his bafflement, asking, "Only not bad?" Zhong Lizi sat by his side and said, "The story is interesting, but the emotion is not so intense and the contradictions are not so intense. The key is the writing. I felt so sad when Lien Sanhua died, but I couldn't cry." Jingjiu thought to himself that she had cried a few times last night. What was the reason for that? Was it the spring rain that Lu Ci transformed into, or the fight between him and Nanchu? That young Master Li is so pitiful, thinking of the lonely grave at the 3,000 nunnery and the song of the happy night. Zhong Lizi felt more and more sad. She couldn't help but burst into tears after a sleepless night. Jingjiu didn't say anything, nor did he do anything to comfort her. All he did was watch her cry in silence. It was pointless for her to cry alone. She gradually stopped crying and glanced at Jingjiu angrily. Then she picked up her backpack and went to the institute. Zhong Lizi truly thought that the novel titled, The Path Toward Heaven, was a good one, but she forgot that she had read it all in one go, so she didn't have to endure the pain of reading the latest chapters. The forum of the New Era Institute was quiet. The novel didn't cause any reaction, except for a few comments. And the comments were not about the content of the novel, but about the rumors related to the author. Zhong Lizi was not convinced, so she couldn't help but bring it up in class. She asked her classmates to read the novel and comment on it, and it would be best if they could give it a few likes. A few days later, she heard the complaints of her classmates outside the classroom. She couldn't help but tell Jingjiu about it after she returned home. After the news was over, Jingjiu turned to Zhong Lizi and asked, "What did you just say?" "I'm giving you a suggestion on behalf of the readers. Your writing style is pretty good, accurate and clean, but the plot is too far apart and the writing is too unorganized. As a result, I can't remember what happened in the beginning." Zhong Lizi continued after some thought, "There is another important problem. Jing Yang pretends to be nonchalant when he does things. It's too pretentious and it's annoying." Jingjiu thought that he was a nonchalant ferryman to begin with. How could he pretend to be pretentious? Life went on in a nonchalant manner. Time flowed like water. The novel posted on the New Era Institute's website went with the flow, not stirring up any ripples. Zhong Lizi had gradually lost her motivation, but Jingjiu didn't care about it at all. He spent all his time and energy on studying. One day, he had finally finished reading all the textbooks on physics and mathematics on the Institute's website. He had basically mastered them according to his requirement. The more complicated physics and mathematics knowledge couldn't be found on the Institute's website. As for the books on the 3 bookshelves in the room, most of them were books on economics, finance, and accounting. It was true that Zhong Lizi's father was an economics professor. An economics professor committed suicide because of a fund scam. Jing Jiu couldn't help but shake his head, thinking that the mortals were indeed a kind of interesting and pitiful existence, no matter in the universe or in Chaotian. By dusk, Zhong Lizi had received a week's worth of food and returned home in the faintly discernible twilight. Seeing Jing Jiu watching TV while lying in the chair, she couldn't help but feel it odd, asking, "Do you also rest?" Jing Jiu uttered, and explained after some thought, "I've finished reading them." "You've finished reading them? It's a 4-year course at the Institute, but you've finished reading them in a dozen days." Zhong Lizi didn't believe what he said. She turned on the computer on the tea table and demanded, "You should write your graduation thesis for me to read." "I don't want it," said Jing Jiu without taking his eyes off the TV screen. He didn't want it, because he didn't need any proof. Of course, the main reason he didn't want it was because he was lazy. Zhong Lizi asked after some thought, "Do you want to do the exam papers? Otherwise, you won't be able to be sure that you have learned them." Jing Jiu, still staring at the TV screen, said casually, "I have." Zhong Lizi was startled. She turned on the question bank on the Institute's website and found that Jing Jiu had indeed done 7 sets of exam papers, and he got full marks for each set. It was exceedingly quiet in the room, save for the familiar voice of the newscaster. "Did you copy the answers?" "Otherwise, how could you get so many full marks?" "I didn't get any other marks." Kneeling on the chair, Zhong Lizi looked down at Jing Jiu's face, her eyes full of awe and respect. In the next moment, the awe and respect in her eyes turned into sympathy and pity. It was said that the students would choose to input the knowledge directly during the elementary learning, so they didn't have to memorize it. He was such a genius, but he had to learn by himself. It was evident that he was despised by his clan, and he might have been persecuted. As a result, he fled to the underworld. Zhong Lizi seemed to have witnessed an exciting story. The young genius would take back what belonged to him in the end. Zhong Lizi was the light that the young genius met at the lowest point of his life, a companion or even a partner? "Do you want to go to school?" Staring into Jing Jiu's eyes, Zhong Lizi said, "You shouldn't waste your time on the elementary knowledge because of your talent. All the knowledge you should learn is in the internal database of the library of the Institute." Jing Jiu knew that she was at the New Era Institute, which was similar to Yamatsui compared to other institutes. "Okay," he said. Zhong Lizi couldn't help but cough out of excitement, as if she had witnessed a legendary scene. Jing Jiu shot her a glance. She waved her hand to indicate that she was all right, and turned around to go back to the bedroom. She didn't find that Jing Jiu had followed her into the bedroom. Like what he had done a few days ago, Jing Jiu turned into a ghost. He stood in a corner of the bedroom in silence, looking at Zhong Lizi on the bed. With her back to the door, she wrapped her head in the quilt and coughed softly. It seemed that she didn't want to disturb Jing Jiu, who should be in the living room. The bed quivered along with her coughing, and her silvery hair outside the quilt quivered as well. She looked quite pitiful. Chapter 768. This bedroom was much larger than the study room, but it had no window. The window was fake, so the starry sky outside and the blue sky and white clouds during the day were fake as well. Like the cell in the sword jail, the snowland and the icy peak were also fake. They were used to relieve the snow girl's boredom. Everybody would be imprisoned by various things for various reasons. The snow girl was imprisoned in Chaotian, and this girl with silvery hair was imprisoned by her illness. The thermostat in the bedroom was not very good either. Zhong Lizi groaned in a low voice, feeling extremely uncomfortable. She broke out in cold sweat a few times, wetting the upper edge of the bedding and her silvery hair. Jing Jiu looked at her in silence and waved his hand to let her fall into a deep sleep. The coughing in the room disappeared, and so did the trembling of the bed and the groaning. Jingjiu came to the head of the bed and looked at the face of the girl with silvery hair. Even though she was asleep, her eyebrows were furrowed, and her face was as pale as a piece of paper. 2 bright sword lights came out in the deep end of his eyes. His gaze swept over her body like a sword, and he could see clearly the condition of her body through the bedding and clothes. He had found something wrong with the body of this girl with silvery hair the first night he came to this room. Now that he had a closer look, he found out that it was a serious problem. Her body was much weaker than it looked, and there were a few traces of frosted glass in her lungs. But the real problem was in her blood. The blood flowing along the blood vessels had an ominous energy. His vision became sharper, allowing him to see even more subtle images, and the cells that were constantly swimming around. According to what he had learned in the last few days, the ratio of the blood cells was not right, and there were too many white blood cells. This was a serious case of leukemia. If she hadn't been suppressed by the medicine, she would have died a long time ago. Jingjiu could completely cure this disease, but it would be troublesome and it would take a long time. As such, all he did was send a sword will into the girl's body to stabilize her condition for the time being. The next day was also a rest day. Zhonglizi felt quite energetic after she got up. She cooked a pot of rice porridge, and then led Jingjiu to the street to run errands. The latter was even rarer than cooking for herself. The 2 of them walked on the street wearing the hooded sweatshirts over their heads. At noon, the streets were still so deserted. The sun, which was extremely rare in the underground world, swept past the corner of the sky, catching a glimpse of it. The countless people living in this block and similar blocks would usually stay at home and rarely go out. Anyway, he wouldn't be able to bask in the sun when he went out. The deeper they went, the quieter the street became. Even the sound of children being beaten and scolded could not be heard from inside the building. Many of the street lamps here had been broken, and the light was even dimmer. The face in the hat was dark too. Jingjiu touched the sportswear and felt very satisfied. He even liked it a little. This kind of clothes was very convenient, and the zipper design was even more convenient. The most convenient part was the hat at the back of the clothes, which could perfectly cover the perfect face, and there was no need to wear a conical hat. There was a very inconspicuous door on the street in front of him. It was about the width of a person and a half. The rusty shutter door was much sturdier than it looked, and there were still traces of iron rods on it. Zhonglizi led Jingjiu to the door and knocked lightly on the roller shutter door, calling in a low voice, "Master Dan, it's me." Along with the faint buzzing sound of the motor, the roller shutter door was opened. The 2 of them walked in. In the dim environment, the stable light source was particularly eye-catching. A middle-aged man in a coarse cloth coat with a magnifying glass sat behind the table, staring at the object on the light source and doing something. "What do you want to do?" he asked without lifting his head. Zhonglizi took off the hat and came before the table, saying, "We want to make a bracelet." The middle-aged man called Master Dan lifted his head and took off the magnifying glass on his head. He looked at Jingjiu behind her, and it seemed that he was not satisfied that Jingjiu didn't want to show his face. 30,000 credits or 2 gold coins, he said casually. The price was indeed very high, but it was quite cheap for the humans in the Federation of the Milky Way who had no identification marks and could hardly move around. Zhonglizi didn't know the situation on the black market lately, and she didn't care much about it. It was not her money anyway. She turned to Jingjiu. "Wait for me," said Jingjiu. Having said that, Jingjiu opened the roller shutter door and walked back to the street. To Master Dan's and Zhonglizi's surprise, Jingjiu came back soon after. He placed 2 brand new and well-preserved gold coins on the table. Seeing the 2 gold coins, the corners of Master Dan's eyes twitched uncontrollably. He turned around and placed a stool in front of Jingjiu, saying, "Please sit down." He had mentioned 2 gold coins casually. He didn't expect Jingjiu to take out so many gold coins. 2 gold coins were almost the same as 30,000 credits, but their meanings were completely different. The only people who would use the gold coins as currency were the important figures in the black market, save for those in the upper echelons. Jingjiu had gotten used to others' awe and respect, so he sat on the stool calmly. Zhonglizi shot him a glance. Master Dan had already prepared himself. He took out a box from a hidden compartment in the drawer and took out an iris lens gingerly. "This is brand new," he explained. Jingjiu didn't believe what Master Dan said. He took the iris lens and pretended to put it into his eye, but he actually crushed it into powder. As Master Dan was collecting the information of the iris lens, he was shocked by the face under the lamp again, his hands almost trembling. It took half an hour to make the identification mark. Jingjiu thought it was too long. The Aoyama sect didn't bother to make the sword board. They simply asked the disciples to put a sword will into it, and there would be no problem. Moreover, it was quite troublesome to make the identification mark by matching the bracelet with the pupil. Jingjiu was not used to the bracelet. The bracelet should be made of a high-molecular composite material, which was highly resistant to high-temperature corrosion and extremely light. Jingjiu still didn't like it. He didn't like anything on his body, including any accessories. The clean heart bell given to him by Sensei had been tied around Ada's neck. "What if he has no hands?" Jingjiu asked suddenly. Zhonglizi said, "Some people choose to make it into a necklace, but most people choose to implant it because they find it troublesome. I heard that the distant ancient civilization used this method." "What about the blind man?" asked Jingjiu. Zhonglizi wondered if Jingjiu had been influenced by the trend on the forum when he visited the Institute network recently. She said indignantly, "There must be another way." It was even darker in the deep end of the street. Many shady businesses could be found here, like the shop of Master Dan, in addition to the black market meat trading market and the private internet cafes banned by the Federation. This kind of internet cafes could often break through the layers of blockades and access all the contents of the Institute network and even the top network, so they were quite popular among the young people. This kind of internet cafes had another name, the gaming hall. Those who could run the gaming hall in the underground neighborhood must be important figures in the black market. The owner of this gaming hall was no exception. As far as he was concerned, the businesses here were merely camouflage and a transfer station for the black money. "Who can explain to me what is going on here?" The owner of the gaming hall pointed to the open safe behind him and looked at a dozen underworld men in front of him, his eyes seemingly ablaze with fire that could erupt at any moment. Looking at the gold coins and crystal cards in the safe, those underworld men swallowed hard. "Big boss, isn't the money all here?" one of them asked bravely. 2 gold coins are missing." The owner of the gaming hall was very tall and fat. He exuded an intimidating aura as he stood there expressionlessly. "No, 3 gold coins are missing, including the one we lost a few days ago." The 3 gold coins were indeed a lot of money, enough to keep the most beautiful girl next door for 3 months. However, there were so many gold coins in the safe. Why was the big boss so angry? "Money is not a problem." "No, money is a problem. It's because these are the gold coins that even I can't use. But they're gone now, and they're gone without a trace." The owner of the gaming hall suddenly lost his temper, yelling while spitting saliva, "Someone has been here the whole time. How did that thief steal it? Is it a damn ghost?" A subordinate who was good at stealing had been studying the safe. After a while, he said, "Big boss, your safe is a retromechanical safe, so it's impossible to open it by other means. There is only one explanation: someone knows your password." The owner of the gaming hall turned around and slapped him to the ground, saying, "Even my wife doesn't know the password. Who else would know it?" Jingjiu didn't need to know the password to open the safe. It was because his hand was the sharpest sword in the world, and it was also the key to open all the locks, just like his face. Hold it in for a while. Zhong Lizi thought he was the illegitimate son of a clan above, so he must have brought a great deal of money with him when he fled to this world. As such, she didn't suspect the origin of those gold coins. They came to the end of the street and saw a cliff whose top couldn't be seen. There was a flight of stairs in the middle of the cliff, and a silvery line in the distance, which might be an escalator. Follow me. Zhong Lizi took a deep breath, her silvery hair tousling slightly. Her body became much lighter, and her feet left the ground slowly. This was the first time Jingjiu had seen someone in this world use the cultivation state, aside from the matches on TV. He was curious about it. Zhong Lizi tapped the ground with the tip of her foot and drifted up the stairs like a patch of cloud. Soon, she was 100 feet away. She suddenly thought that Jingjiu was still behind her, feeling worried. She turned around and found that she had thought too much. He came from the upper world, so it was impossible for him not to know the cultivation state. Jingjiu walked up the mountain path with his hands folded behind his back. He arrived by her side effortlessly. "You're acting like an old man," Zhong Lizi mocked him before she continued drifting toward the top of the cliff. It didn't take long for the two of them to arrive at the top of the cliff. The sunlight here was much brighter than in the underground world, and they could see some blue sky and white clouds. The blue sky and white clouds were in a semi-transparent state. If someone from Chaotian came here, he would feel uncomfortable and might even feel dizzy. While thinking of all this, Jingjiu gazed at the deep end of the blue sky and white clouds, and he could vaguely see the shadow of a battleship. There was a large patch of grassland on the cliff, and many buildings could be seen in the distance. They must be the New Era Institute. Chapter 769. Zhong Lizi noticed that Jingjiu's countenance was the same as usual, and his breathing was the same. She couldn't help but feel envious, asking, "What state are you in?" The cultivation states in this world were divided into a few major states. Most of the people at the New Era Institute were in the initial state, or the fire-observing state. The fire-observing state was divided into 12 levels. Jingjiu had learned all this from the computer and the books. Looking at the intermittent battleship, he thought it was better to keep a low profile. "Level 11?" he asked. Zhong Lizi said while looking at him enviously, "The professors at the New Era Institute are about level 10, to say nothing of the students. I think you're a genius no matter where you are." Jingjiu thought this was a fact that couldn't be denied. By no matter where, she meant the underground neighborhood, the New Era Institute and above. What Jingjiu was thinking about was the universe and Chaotian. After entering the New Era Institute, Zhong Lizi led him to the administration office and applied for the qualification to sit in on the class as a relative. Jingjiu reached out his wristband to register his identity. Then he received the certificate of sitting in on the class and the most important library card. With the library card, he could go to the library and access the internal database to get the teaching materials and works he wanted to learn. The bell rang in a building in the distance. Zhong Lizi led him to the front door of the library and told him a few things to pay attention to, and then went to class in a hurry. She stopped short after taking 2 steps and turned around as if she had thought of something, saying, "Don't wander around. I'll take you to the canteen for lunch." She ran a bit fast, stopped a bit fast, and turned around a bit fast. Her silvery hair tousled in the air. They looked like the rotating stars in the universe. The library of the New Era Institute was much smaller than Jingjiu had imagined, at least many times smaller than the library building on Shiriyue Peak. Soon, he realized the reason. The computers and the reading terminals in the library could store many books, which seemed to be more advanced than those in Chaotian. However, the electronic books in the library could only display the 3-dimensional pictures, but couldn't record the sword wills, pen wills, and intentions of the authors. As Jingjiu thought of this, he took out his library card and took out a reading terminal. He found a quiet and remote reading room and sat down. He had been scanned 5 times since he entered the library, came to the reading terminal, and entered the reading room. It was very difficult to avoid those scans. If he didn't want to be scanned, he could only break through the wall. The real problem was that the buildings here were too orderly. People lived in fixed areas according to fixed routes. There were no mountains, rivers, lakes, and seas here. There were even very few trees and rocks. What could he play? Just as he had thought in the laboratory when he first came to this world, was he going to become a wastebasket? The reading terminal was also a computer, but it was connected to the database in the library of the New Era Institute, so the data could be retrieved at any time. Countless rays of light emerged from the terminal and overlapped with each other to form a light screen. It emitted a gentle light that was not harmful to the eyes, forming patterns and words. Jingjiu's fingers moved quickly on the terminal, leaving behind countless afterimages. No one knew what he was pressing. The patterns and characters on the screen changed at an unimaginable speed. If someone stared at the screen in the reading room at this time, they would only see ribbons of light. Even those cultivators with high cultivation could not see the content. The data was constantly changing, and the images were connected into rays of light. In a very short period of time, he had finished reading hundreds of books and journals. Still, he felt it was too slow. It was because many of the contents in the books and journals were repetitive, and most of them were useless information. According to the self-introduction of the library, there were 38 million books in the database here, which was more than 10,000 terabytes of data. T meant trillion terabytes, which he had learned before. How long would it take for him to read all the data in the library at this rate? Jingjiu spread out his sword discernment to make sure that nobody was paying attention to this place and that the wave of scanning was still ahead. He reached out his finger and tapped on the window on the door of the reading room. A sword came out from his finger and cast a layer of vague energy on the window. If someone looked in from the outside, they would only see that Jingjiu was recording something on the light screen. The sword spread out after touching the glass of the window, forming a sword formation in a few seconds, isolating the outside world except for an opening for the high-speed optical cable to transmit data. Having done all this, Jingjiu cut off the connection between the optical cable and the reading terminal, and then held it in his hand. If Zhao Lei were here, she would have noticed a slight change in Jingjiu's hand. Jingjiu started reading the data transmitted from the optical cable with his eyes closed. It was not accurate to use the word reading. It was more accurate to use the word absorbing. It was also inaccurate to use the word transmitting. It was more accurate to use the word flooding. An incalculable amount of data flowed into his body like a tide. Even though his consciousness was as deep as the sea, there were still some ripples in it. The waves were white and his face turned a bit paler. What's going on? Seeing the warning signal displayed in the database, the teachers of the library of the New Era Institute eyed each other in bewilderment. In the next moment, the doors of all the reading rooms in the library were opened. The students came out from the reading rooms in bewilderment, asking why the terminals had malfunctioned. The lights in the hall didn't flicker, and no electric sparks were generated, but an eerie and tense atmosphere had gradually filled the air. It was unclear which information node couldn't withstand the impact of the large amount of data and was disconnected. If the database had a soul, it would have felt relieved inwardly. The door of a reading room was opened without any wind. It was unclear who had left. The data optical cable dropped to the ground like a dead snake, devoid of any energy. Jingjiu walked out of the library and looked up at the sky while standing on the stone step. Looking at the indistinct figures of the battleships behind the blue sky and white clouds, a hint of regret showing in the deep end of his eyes. It was an interesting thing to absorb knowledge, especially the knowledge that he had never encountered before. Back when he had just arrived in Aoyama, he was taken by his big brother to Shuriwe Peak to read the books for a few years, and he had read all the books and records in Aoyama. Since then, he had rarely felt as happy as he did today. It was because it was so interesting that he was immersed in it, absorbing the information at an increasingly faster rate. The capacity of the data optical cable could still hold on, but the database was being read so much that the computing core couldn't hold on any longer. He thought he should leave the library for safety reasons, but he decided to stay where he was when he remembered that Zhong Lizi said she would have lunch with him. It didn't take long before Zhong Lizi ran over from the teaching building and came to the foot of the stone step. "I heard something happened in the library," she said after catching her breath while holding her knees. Jingjiu didn't understand why she had to run around when she had such a serious blood disease. "I don't know," he said calmly. The canteen of the New Era Institute was not far from the library. Zhong Lizi found he really didn't know anything about the library after she told him about it. Feeling bored, she suddenly halted her steps and asked Jingjiu, "Would you like to meet my classmates? If they knew you were the true path." Jingjiu didn't wait for her to finish her sentence, refusing directly, "No." Zhong Lizi felt even more bored, saying, "Fine." The two of them walked into the canteen. Many people looked in their direction. Jingjiu covered his head with the cap of the tracksuit, so his silvery hair attracted everyone's attention. Many people at the New Era Institute had learned that she had written a novel over the last few days, and they also knew what had happened to her family. Some of the gazes contained surprise, sympathy, mockery, and contempt. All the students knew was that her parents had died, and she had failed the second gene modification. It seemed that she had some kind of disease, but nobody could find out about it due to the privacy rules. The reason they were surprised was that she had never come to the canteen to eat. "I thought she was an otherworldly princess who looked down on the food of mortals like us. Turns out that she is just poor." There was a table in the distance with 4 girls sitting around it. A girl said this mockingly while looking in this direction. The other 3 girls laughed out loud. Another girl remarked scornfully, "I thought she was going to be a priest when I saw her cold and aloof appearance." Though these discussions were not loud, Zhong Lizi couldn't hear them, but she knew what had happened from the laughter and the undisguised gazes. She led Jingjiu to a corner and sat down without giving any response. Jingjiu had heard all the discussions clearly, but he didn't pay any attention to them. Zhong Lizi asked him to sit down, and she went to get the food. Seeing this, the crowd felt even more curious, wondering who the guy with the cap covering his face was. Why did he let Zhong Lizi do all this for him? The food on the plate was not the cheapest nutrition cube, but the real vegetables and fried steak. Jingjiu didn't care what he ate, and it didn't matter whether he ate it or not. Thinking of her kindness, he nodded to express his gratitude. It was then that a young girl came to the front of the table after some hesitation. She looked at Zhong Lizi, hesitating to say something. Zhong Lizi lifted her head and asked, "What's the matter?" The young girl said shamefully with tears in her eyes, "Lizi, I'm sorry. I told the class about your childhood, but I didn't expect those people to hear it." Zhong Lizi said with a smile, "Silly girl, do you think I'll blame you?" Hearing this, the young girl felt relieved. She left after saying sorry while covering her chest with her hand. Zhong Lizi took off the hair tie on her wrist and tied up her silvery hair, asking Lu Shuiqian, my classmate from the elementary school and the middle school, "What do you think?" "She's lying," said Jingjiu. Chapter 770. Back when he was in Chaotian, he could tell whether someone was telling the truth or lying at first glance. He could do the same thing now. It was because humans were humans. It was easy to determine the result based on the speed of blood flow, the frequency of breathing, the length of breath, the pupils, the posture of the body, and the fluctuation of consciousness. Zhong Lizi lowered her head and started eating, as if she didn't care about these things. Jingjiu didn't move. She lifted her head and shot him a glance, saying, "This is my food allowance for half a month. Are you sure you don't want to eat it?" It's not convenient, said Jingjiu. Zhong Lizi thought he meant that it was not convenient to wear the hat, so she said confusedly, take off the hat. It's even more inconvenient, said Jingjiu. Thinking of his face, Zhong Lizi nodded and said, let's do it then. If he exposed his face, the voices of countless infatuated girls would ring out in the canteen, and everybody would come over to see him. How could they eat then? The discussions in the canteen were still going on at the tables, but they were all clearly heard by Jingjiu. The female students were talking about Zhong Lizi's appearance and guessing the relationship between her and Jingjiu, and then they started mocking her. Is your appearance not considered good-looking here? Asked Jingjiu. Zhong Lizi brought the steak in front of her and said, I'm the most good-looking. To say nothing of the New Era Institute, she was the most beautiful girl even in the upper echelons of society. Her mother had said this when she was a child. Her mother was also a famous beauty. If her mother hadn't suffered from a serious illness and failed to improve her genes, she wouldn't have married her father, a poor teacher, because she knew she couldn't live much longer and wanted to pursue love by burning her life force. Now that she thought of it, her father committed suicide because he loved her very much and felt hopeless after her death. Zhong Lizi thought of all this with a faint smile as she cut the steak with a knife and fork. The ceramic plates gave off an ear-piercing sound, and the remaining heat was instantly frozen. The complaints and angry curses broke out in the surroundings. The female students who liked to make ear-piercing sounds carried their plates and went to a farther place. Jingjiu thought this child looked a bit like himself, but he couldn't understand why others would speak ill of him even though he was good-looking. I'm more handsome, but nobody will speak ill of me, Jingjiu said to Zhong Lizi. Is there something wrong with your temperament? Zhong Lizi slammed the knife and fork on the table forcefully and stared at Jingjiu for a long while before saying, the pretty flowers are easy to pick and they are also easy to be envied. The reason why nobody in Chaotian dared speak ill of Jingjiu was not because he was beautiful, but because he was powerful. He continued while looking at Zhong Lizi. As such, the flowers should have thorns. There was a deeper meaning in these words. Zhong Lizi thought that Jingjiu was an illegitimate son who had escaped from a higher clan. Otherwise, she would have knelt down on the ground and asked him to be her master. Jingjiu would not do anything to those who mocked her. He wasn't good at those things. There was no need for that. Kill him with a single strike? The crime was not worthy of death. They were all children. The most important thing was to keep a low profile. He had never kept a low profile in Chaotian, and he was studying hard. After lunch, Zhong Lizi went back to the teaching building, and Jingjiu went to the library. There were many things in the database that he hadn't read yet. What he didn't expect was that the library put up a maintenance notice and wouldn't be open in the afternoon. Jingjiu wanted to connect the database by himself, and he even wanted to go to the library on the upper floors to have a look, but he was worried that he would be discovered. The battleship was still drifting in the space, leaving behind an annoying shadow through the blue sky and white clouds. Standing on the high stone steps, Jingjiu didn't know what to do next, so he decided to go home and watch TV. As he walked past the patch of grass, a young girl suddenly blocked his way. Jingjiu remembered that she was the child who apologized to Zhong Lizi with tears in her eyes. Her name was Lu Shuiqian. "Who are you?" asked Lu Shuiqian while looking at Jingjiu with an alarmed expression. Jingjiu didn't answer her question, and kept on walking forward. Lu Shuiqian didn't give up. She followed Jingjiu in a jog, saying, Lizi has never been to the canteen, and she has never been so close to a boy. Who are you? She grew more anxious when she didn't hear Jingjiu's answer, and tears welled up in her eyes again. Are you her boyfriend? You can't lie to her. You have no idea that she has to pass the 5th level to qualify as an exchange student. This is her last chance. She's only at the 4th level, so she should spend all her time on studying and cultivation. Hearing these seemingly caring but actually inquiring words, Jingjiu felt annoyed. Do you have a death wish? he asked, halting his steps. Lu Shuiqian was taken aback. Sensing the cold intent exuding from the cap of Jingju's tracksuit, she turned pale in fright and ran to a distant place. Jingju fixed his gaze on a spot on the grass, where a metal instrument was placed. It should be the testing instrument for grading mentioned on TV and in the book. Boom! Boom! The explosive sounds kept on bursting out from the instrument. A dozen young boys and girls were taking the test there. The air waves came out, rolling up the debris. The youth with the best result had exerted a force of several hundred kilograms. The humans in this world could all practice the cultivation, and they could stimulate the zhenqi in their bodies to a higher level after their genes were modified. If they were lucky enough to receive the blessing of the female priest, they would become the swordsman in the starry sky. In comparison to the mortals in Chaotian, the humans in this world were indeed much stronger, but they were still too weak compared to the ascendants in Chaotian. The cultivation of the cultivation was based on the zhenqi, not the fairy energy. That night when Zhonglizi asked him to read some books on cultivation, he said that it was the end of cultivation. The fairy energy in this world was abundant, but they didn't know how to use it. They could only use the magic treasures to attack it. It was truly inferior. Of course, it was also because the bodies of the humans in this world were too weak to practice the magic methods in Chaotian. But why were the bodies of the humans in this world so weak? Jingju jumped off the cliff by the edge of the grass and returned to his apartment building. Lying on a comfortable chair, he watched the boring TV and thought about this question. He suddenly stood up and walked to the kitchen, picking up a dining knife and hacking at his arm. Thinking of Yi Tianxing, crack? The dining knife was broken in half. Next, he pressed his finger on his arm and pulled it gently. A white mark appeared on the surface of his arm soundlessly and then gradually closed up. Time. The speed of light decreased. Electrons. Elementary particles. A strong force. Countless words appeared in his consciousness, and then he combined them together to come to a conclusion through deduction. As expected, Jingjiu took out the paper and looked at the two words he had written on it for a long time. The words written on the paper were year and robot. These two words seemed to have nothing to do with each other, and they had nothing to do with the words he had thought of earlier. Jingjiu murmured to himself, Ping Yongka, it turns out that you are an artificial intelligence. The next day, Jingjiu went to the library of the New Era Institute again. He was prepared in advance this time. He was not as greedy as he was the day before. He excluded all the information before time and space, and focused on the information related to astronomy and the universe. The data transmitted in this way wouldn't be too exaggerated. What he wanted to know most was the origin of this civilization and the truth of the Sea of Dark Matter, and then find the information related to Chaotian. The Sea of Dark Matter. It was easy to associate this name with the dark matter. Was it possible that the evil and deathly civilization belonged to the civilization of the dark matter? The study of the dark matter in this world was still shallow, and the existence of the dark matter hadn't even been discovered yet. What puzzled him more was that those monsters that looked like black dandelions without handles gave him a sense of familiarity. Those monsters from the Sea of Dark Matter. Had he seen them somewhere before, but he had forgotten? The difference in the speed of light was also a problem. If the speed of time originated from the difference in the mass of the astronomical objects, Chaotian couldn't be in a black hole, but in a high-speed light region. Yet, he couldn't figure it out no matter how hard he tried, unless he introduced a constant. However, history had proven that one would regret it if he introduced a constant carelessly. Jingjiu was thinking about all this while he was absorbing the knowledge in the database and calculating. The only thing he was certain of was that this world and Chaotian had the same origin. The two civilizations were not similar, but they were the same. However, the two civilizations had been isolated from each other for a great many years, right in front of that bamboo chair. Chapter 771. After returning to the apartment building, Jing Jiu was still mulling over this issue. Since they belonged to the same civilization, why were they divided into two sides? Was it this side that was thrown out of the other side, or that side that was thrown out of the other side? Jing Jiu walked to the window and looked up at the sky. The faint clouds in the sky looked like Aoyama, and many large platforms could be vaguely seen in the clouds. Those platforms were not built in the space. In fact, they were in the mantle of the planet. Many years ago, the rocks and minerals there had been transported to the factories in the space, leaving only the working platforms. Later, many buildings were built on the platforms to serve as residences for the humans. The cliff where the New Era Institute was located was in the deep part of the mantle of the planet. Further down the cliff was the deserted neighborhood and the laboratory from which he had escaped. It should have been the core of the planet. It was said that it was separated from the Stargate during the modification of the planet and became the metal source for countless battleships. It was true that this planet had been hollowed out by the humans. Only the crust of the planet remained. Only the female priest, the aristocrats and the officials of the highest status were qualified to live on the ground covered with forests and lakes. As far as Zhonglizi was concerned, the people living on the ground and those on the platforms were all the people living on the ground. As far as the humans were concerned, the utilization of the resources on the planet would result in such a situation. Jing Jiu had read the history of the Federation of the Milky Way, and knew that the Stargate base had survived the invasions of the Sea of Dark Matter several times because of this peculiar structure. The Earth could provide a sense of security for the humans, regardless of whether it was under their feet or above their heads. Yet, Jing Jiu didn't think that the Federation of the Milky Way had the technological prowess to do so. He thought that this planet should be a remnant of the distant ancient civilization. His line of sight passed through the highest ground and arrived at a corner of the universe, where a few battleships were hovering and countless stars at different distances exuded different shades of light. Those stars were the fireballs that could provide endless fairy energy. The method of utilizing the fairy energy in this world was rather backward. Jing Jiu was certain that this was a relatively low-level civilization, and it was impossible for the world of Chaotian to have originated from this civilization. Was it possible that the people in this world were the descendants of the Ascendants? Judging from the body structure and other aspects of the humans in this world, it was unlikely. He stood in front of the window and looked at the corner of the universe that was as dark as the mouth of a well. He deduced and calculated in silence for a long time and came up with a vague idea. Since the distant ancient civilization that had perished together with the Sea of Dark Matter could be revived in the ruins of the stars, did they make some preparations in the other world before their destruction? This world called the Federation of the Milky Way had been advancing on the path of science and the investigation of objects. The world in Chaotian had embarked on a completely different path because of its high speed of light and its isolation from the outside world. The great Tao leads to the heavens, and each walks a different path. Unfortunately, regardless of whether it was the Academy's intranet or the library's database, there were no records of the ancient civilization. It was obvious that it was under some kind of restriction. Jing Jiu wondered if he should knock out a priestess and use the two-mind connection of the Guoqing temple to read her memory. However, it was said that there was a hidden network in the interstellar network, and there were many secrets inside. Thinking of this, he knew what he should learn first. In fact, apart from the brief news on TV about the fleet destroying the mother nest, the first tool Jing Jiu used to learn about this world was the computer, and the first thing he learned was how to operate the computer. At the time, all he needed to do was learn the basic knowledge and operation of the computer and how to browse and search for the information he wanted. What he needed to learn now was more advanced knowledge, including but not limited to the structure of the hardware, the basic construction of the core, and most importantly, the method of the Cloud Ghost. The Cloud Ghost was the name given by the humans in the Federation of the Milky Way to the highly achieved experts in cracking the network. It was said that it had something to do with a computing method called cloud in the distant ancient times. Those highly achieved swordsmen were like ghosts living in the network. They could enter and exit the heavily guarded places at will without being discovered. After exchanging the bracelet for the terminal, Jing Jiu came to the quiet reading room and set up the inherited heaven sword formation to block the peeping from the outside world. Then, he held the data optical cable and closed his eyes. His long and thin eyelashes quivered slightly, indicating that his awareness was working at a high speed, searching and absorbing some data. In a very short period of time, he had finished reading the relevant knowledge in the Academy's intranet and the library's database. In an even shorter period of time, he had prepared 3 plans, and then used half a minute to gain control of the entire database. Soon after, he started to crack the data by force. It took him 2 minutes to successfully break through the barrier and enter the network of the upper level of the Stargate base. It was like a small stream suddenly flowing into the ocean. In an instant, a large amount of data gushed into his sea of consciousness. If the data in the library had caused countless waves in his sea of consciousness, the data that day would cause a huge wave. It might be a bit dangerous, but it was more of a temptation. Jing Jiu resisted the temptation with his strong willpower. He didn't immerse himself in the ocean of data to search for the unknown and novel things. Instead, he continued his work attentively. In the ocean of data, he found more and more advanced knowledge about computers and the network, and then he absorbed them like a sponge. About 3 minutes later, the relevant data in the network of the upper level of the Stargate base entered his mind. This time, he didn't try to obtain the control of the upper level of the network. Instead, he continued to crack the data. It took him a long time to finally enter the interplanetary network. Even he felt a sense of satisfaction at the moment. He opened his eyes and rested for a while. Then, he noticed the time on the terminal and found that 10 minutes had elapsed. The data in the interplanetary network had surpassed the scope of the ocean. It was as vast as the universe, and all the objects and principles were contained in it. He could study all these later, Jing Jiu said to himself in his mind. He closed his eyes and made a few false digital marks in the network of the upper level of the Stargate base and 3 information jump bridges. After that, he continued searching for the things he needed and started to study. Half an hour later, he felt that he was ready. The most formidable cloud ghost in the Federation of the Milky Way shouldn't be much stronger than him. As such, he made some more digital marks and information jump bridges and started to search for the hidden network. The hidden network was the lowest level of the interplanetary network. It was the most mysterious and most formidable place in the world. It was said that there were the remnants of the distant ancient civilization, the detailed introduction of the Sea of Dark Matter, the secrets of the Patriarch Association, the architectural blueprints of the Science Academy, and even the relevant papers on the stellar-level weapons. Even though the laboratory on the Stargate base had the fastest computing speed and the most powerful data analysis software, it would take them at least 3 days to find the entrance to the hidden network. In the meantime, the hidden network must have sensed that someone was spying on them and changed the entrance, or even closed the entrance. This was the introduction on the interplanetary network. As such, when Jing Jiu saw the talismans fluttering like snowflakes in front of him, he realized that he had already entered the hidden network after a moment of bewilderment. He was a dedicated person. What he meant by this was not his love, but his work. Now that he had decided to master the knowledge of the computer and the network, nothing could change his direction. The knowledge about the cloud ghost in the hidden network was indeed much deeper, and it brought him a rare pleasure. As a result, he felt a bit reluctant to leave when he opened his eyes after he had finished reading the information. However, there were other pleasures waiting for him, like the secret of the distant ancient civilization. He closed his eyes again. The talismans fluttering like snowflakes in front of him didn't seem any different from before, but he noticed a change in the upper right corner. He looked in that direction in silence, and ascertained that a talisman was moving. It was quite normal for talismans to move in the network, but he was on the interface of a data collecting channel. Such a small and subtle change made him feel something was not quite right. He got ready, and then focused his awareness on that moving talisman. A faint "pa" sound rang out in his mind. The moving talisman knew that it had been discovered by him, so it tore off its disguise and chased after his awareness. Jingjiu started to retreat without hesitation. The talismans fluttering like snowflakes in the sky started to move at an unimaginably high speed, as if they were being rolled by a strong wind. They formed many barriers in an attempt to slow down the retreating speed of his awareness, but they were all destroyed. Two streams of awareness or data flow chased each other in the hidden network. In a few moments, they broke out of the sea and returned to the interplanetary network. The false digital markers set up by Jingjiu were easily seen through by the data flow. The data flow passed through the bridges of information before they could break. Soon, the data flow arrived at the Stargate base after chasing after his awareness. The false digital markers he had set up in the beginning took some time for the data flow to break through the three bridges of information. Pa! Pa! Three fake snapping sounds rang out in the upper layer of the network of the Stargate base. The data flow arrived at a computer on the platform on the third level of the Stargate base. After hovering for a while, it left silently, displaying a lonely and unreconciled emotion. Jingjiu opened his eyes and looked at the data optical cable in his right hand, remaining silent for a while. As soon as he was discovered by the data flow, he let go of the optical cable, so he didn't have to worry that the other party could find him. However, if he did so, the other party could easily find him at the New Era Institute, the library, and then this reading room. He had to use his awareness to activate those false digital markers and break those bridges of information so that he would be safe. Even if the other party could find the Stargate base, he didn't have to worry about it. There were billions of people living on and off this planet, and billions of terminals. It was impossible for them to find him. As he left the library, he took out the latest recording disc from the database and headed toward the cliff on the other side of the grassland. He squeezed the disc slightly, crushing it into powder. The powder fell down from between his fingers and landed on the green grassland, resembling the white lines drawn during a soccer match. He was on this side, and the students were on the other side. Chapter 772. The state tests at the New Era Institute had become more frequent. It was unclear if it had something to do with the upcoming grading test. A cheer broke out around the testing apparatus in the distance on the grassland, probably because one of the students had made a breakthrough in the test, along with a few discordant words. Some of them mentioned Zhong Lizi in a mocking and disdainful manner, but they were soon stopped by their classmates. Jingjiu didn't care about these matters, though he thought these kids were too noisy. He dusted off the last bit of silvery dust on his palm, walked to the edge of the cliff, and jumped off the cliff. This spot was lower than the rest of the grassland, and it was blocked by a row of trees, so it was hard to see him. As such, the students at the institute didn't know Zhong Lizi lived down there. It wouldn't matter even if they saw him, because nobody would think he was committing suicide. He needed to think about something that day, so he drifted in the air without speeding up. The wind blew on his face and lifted the hood of his sweatshirt. A small bird flew over nearby, almost crashing into the cliff. If the data stream found him and entered his body through the optical cables, he would be in trouble. Nobody's mental strength was stronger than his, and the data stream couldn't do any harm to him. Yet, someone in this world could use the data as vast as the universe in the interplanetary network to attack him. Jingjiu's feet landed on the ground, making a "pa" sound. He had made up his mind while he was drifting in the air. He decided to use a computer as a safety valve. There were many computers at the New Era Institute, and the terminal in the library was one of them. Though they had a good configuration, they were far inferior to what Jingju needed. The computer he needed could be used as a safety valve, so it had a high requirement on the hardware. More importantly, the hardware structure had to be modified a lot. As such, he had to assemble the computer himself. The most troublesome part of assembling a computer was that he had to choose many kinds of hardware, especially for Jingjiu. He had to divide the hardware systems into smaller parts, and the workload would be much greater. It would take him a long time to find the hardware in the black market. As such, Jingjiu went to the internet cafe called the Gaming Hall again. He took out the hardware he needed from the computers and rummaged through the storeroom before returning home, satisfied. The tall and fat game hall owner was furious once again, and then felt extreme fear. This time, the gold coins in the safe were not lost, but all the computers were not working, and a lot of things were missing from the warehouse. It was daytime, but neither the subordinates guarding the store nor the surveillance cameras could capture the thief's figure. Was it really haunted? Back home, Jingju began to assemble the computer. His fingers could simulate all kinds of tools, and their power was definitely much higher. It didn't take long for him to assemble 2 computers. In Zhong Lizi's words, Jingjiu had completed 2 pieces of work, because these 2 silvery computers were extremely beautiful. Jingjiu turned it on and tested it. After confirming that one of them was almost perfect, he handed the other one to her. Zhong Lizi took the computer and asked in surprise, "Is this for me?" Jingjiu uttered Zhong Lizi let out a joyful yell and ran back to the bedroom with the silvery computer in her arms. She threw herself onto the soft bed and turned on the computer to set up the initial password and the iris authentication. It didn't take long before another surprised scream burst out in the bedroom. She rushed out with the computer in her arms and looked at Jingjiu incredulously. This computer can connect to the interplanetary network? Don't take it to the university and don't let anybody know, Jingjiu reminded her. Zhong Lizi let out another and sat down on the soft chair. She turned on the computer happily and started browsing the information on the interplanetary network. Jingjiu had used many tricks on the computer, so he wasn't worried that the regular surveillance cameras would be able to find this place. He felt that it was a bit crowded for her to sit on the chair, so he moved to the other side and continued setting up the false digital markers and information bridges on the upper level of the Stargate base. He had prepared sufficiently this time. He had designed more than 30 information transmission loops and thousands of false digital markers. By the time he had finished all this, a long time had passed. Zhong Lizi was still leaning against the soft chair, staring at the screen of the computer with a silly smile. "What are you looking at?" Jingjiu wanted to know what the regular people here would learn as soon as they could see the bigger world. Zhong Lizi lifted her head and glanced at Jingjiu, not knowing how to answer him. Jingjiu took a look at the screen and found that it was a video about fashion and some tips for losing weight. He couldn't help but furrow his eyebrows. Zhong Lizi rubbed her hands together with an adorable expression on her face, pleading for mercy. Jingjiu knocked on the table and said expressionlessly, "This is for you to study." Zhong Lizi had no choice but to enter the library on the 3rd level of the Liuli University and start searching for the materials related to her paper. Jingjiu nodded satisfactorily. He walked to the study room and took out a financial book, starting to study the knowledge related to the stock market. After a while, he found that the book was a mess and meaningless. The reason Jingjiu went to the library of the New Era Institute to surf the internet after he had assembled the computer was that the database here had a special information channel, which was much better than the wireless information channel in that neighborhood. Jingjiu entered the reading room and used the Aoyama sword formation to shield the inside and outside of the room. He connected the data cable to the silvery computer, and then inserted his finger into the data output port of the computer. Jingjiu closed his eyes and started searching for the digital markers and information bridges on the upper level of the Stargate base that he had set up in advance. It was a simple operation, but the silvery computer had become extremely hot. Jingjiu finally realized how fast he should think. Soon, he connected to the interplanetary network from the network of the base, and then he entered the hidden network easily. If it were other cloud ghosts, they would be extremely cautious when their true location was almost discovered, and they wouldn't take the risk for a while. Jingjiu would face the heavenly punishment head-on, to say nothing of a small data stream. But why did he turn around and leave that day? Jingjiu's awareness entered the hidden network and saw a large number of amulets that looked like snowflakes drifting into a passage. There was a room at the end of the passage, and someone was already in it. A newcomer? A line of words appeared amid the snowflakes drifting in the air. Soon after, another line of words appeared by the side. Who introduced him? Soon, another line of words appeared before Jingjiu's eyes like a rabbit jumping out of the snow. Is it you? Is it you? Was it you yesterday? How dare you show up in front of me? Jingjiu knew that this person should be the highly achieved cloud ghost who had followed him the day before. Why wouldn't I dare? He asked in the snowflakes. That person asked a question that had already occurred before. Why did you run away the moment you saw me yesterday? You were faster than a rabbit. Ha 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 ha. One could clearly sense his contempt and mockery toward Jingjiu from the words and exclamation marks he chose. It's my first time. I'm inexperienced, so I reacted instinctively. The words Jingjiu typed were as boring as his appearance. Of course, that person didn't believe his explanation. He continued to laugh and said, Then don't run too slowly today. I'll give you a 3-second head start. Only then did the rest of the people in the room realize that the two of them had met yesterday. They were very surprised to hear the content of the conversation and wondered who this newcomer was. This newcomer could actually find the deepest room in the hidden network and even shake off the wild rabbit's pursuit. This was not an ordinary level of skill. No, it's your turn to run today. After saying this, Jingjiu rushed toward the data stream. The data stream disappeared. Before it disappeared, he left a big question mark in the room. He didn't seem to expect this newcomer to be so arrogant. Jingjiu also left the room. In the invisible network, a chase was taking place. The people left in the room took a long time to react. Are my eyes deceiving me? Does he want to find the location of the wild rabbit? It's impossible. The wild rabbit is so cunning. How could that newcomer be his match? He must have found the nest of the wild rabbit. That newcomer. I feel something strange about him. Don't jump to conclusions so early. It didn't take long before the door of the room was opened from the outside. It was not the highly achieved swordsman of the cloud ghost called the wild rabbit, but Jingjiu. It was deathly quiet in the room. A moment later, someone couldn't help but ask, Have you found him? Jingjiu uttered, Where is he? Is he on the Dar planet? No, he must be Emochong from the laboratory of the Starbase. It was evident that the highly achieved swordsmen of the Cloud Ghost Alliance from the Federation of the Milky Way were also interested in the true identity of the wild rabbit. Jingjiu didn't intend to keep the secret for that lad, saying, He is on the battleship. It became quiet again in the room. A moment later, the snowflakes in the sky seemed to explode, scattering everywhere, reflecting the shock and anger of these highly achieved swordsmen of the Cloud Ghost Alliance. Isn't this cheating? No wonder nobody has been able to find him. Since when can the military network and the network of the star area be unimpeded? He used his authority without authorization. Isn't he afraid of being thrown into a permanent star after being tried by the military court? He's too shameless. Which battleship is he on? If it's the military of the 7th planet zone, I'll find someone to kill him. There was a lot of information hidden in these words. For example, some of these highly achieved swordsmen of the Cloud Ghost Alliance had a great influence in the Federation of the Milky Way. Jingjiu was aware of the regulations of the Federation of the Milky Way regarding the demarcation of the networks. He didn't tell them the specific location of the battleship after some thought. The people in the room suddenly thought of another shocking fact. The wild rabbit had been found by this newcomer even though he was hiding on the battleship. It meant that he had completely disregarded the demarcation between the military network and the civilian network. Who on earth was he? Chapter 773. Countless characters fluttered in the room like snowflakes. It looked abnormally messy, without any trace of order. In Jingjiu's eyes, the snowflakes that filled the sky revealed a lot of information. The people in the room were the most outstanding cloud ghosts in the Federation of the Milky Way, but they all fell into a shocked silence because of this newcomer. No one asked about his background or name. This was the rule of the hidden net. Unless you have the ability to locate him yourself. The people in the room definitely didn't want to do that. They were worried that they would anger the other party and end up like the Wild Rabbit. Wild Rabbit was the best at concealing his tracks among them, but even with the military network barrier, they were still caught by this guy. They didn't dare to take the risk. After an unknown period of time, a certain snowflake moved slightly and a line of words appeared. Your goal. No one knew how this newcomer had entered the hidden network or how he had found this room in the deepest part of the interplanetary network. The most crucial question was, why was this newcomer here? I have some questions to ask you. These were Jingjiu's true thoughts. There was indeed a lot of useful information and knowledge in the interplanetary network and the hidden network, and the database was all-inclusive, but there was always some knowledge and experience left in people's mind. These people were all highly intelligent and knowledgeable people in the Federation of the Milky Way. They were good targets to learn from. The snowflakes in the sky froze for a moment, then began to dance again, appearing to be even more free and agile. It was obvious that those people were much more relaxed. I really admire your ability. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Just don't throw out those conjectures. That's right. We don't know each other, but we're both pretty good in our respective fields. We should be able to find the right person to answer any question. Since you caught the hare, I'm willing to answer 3 of your questions. Looking at the characters in the snowflakes and thinking of the girl with silvery hair, Jingjiu thought that the humans in the Federation of the Milky Way were much more enthusiastic than those in Chaotian. He didn't know how to write the word polite, so he directly asked his own questions. The first question was about number theory, which he hated the most. Time passed slowly. He kept asking questions, and the people in the room thought about them seriously and then gave answers. Half an hour later, the room became quiet again. No one spoke. Jingjiu still had a lot of questions. The problem was that no one had answered the first few questions. 1, 2, 3, 4. He silently counted to 20. After confirming that these people were unable to answer his question, he thanked them and left the room. The snowflakes seemed to be frozen in the air, and did not make a sound for a long time. After a while, those people left without saying a word. The snowflakes continued to fall. On the main planet of the Alliance, there was an ordinary-looking laboratory. There was an ordinary workshop next to the toilet in the laboratory. On the counter was a seemingly ordinary computer and some ordinary succulents. An ordinary middle-aged researcher gently tapped on the keyboard, and a small square hidden in the data screen disappeared. He took off his glasses, rubbed his eyebrows, and revealed a self-deprecating smile. He had been away from the university for too long, and the most cutting-edge research had become unfamiliar to him. He couldn't find any clues to that question, but a puzzled expression appeared on his face. Why couldn't those people answer it? Rats and cockroaches were everywhere in the deep end of the underground block of the Wanshan planet base. It was evident that the sanitary conditions here were much worse than on the Stargate base. The torn recruitment posters were drifting on the ground and stuck to the dirty water. It was because the posters were made of composite materials, and even the rats were not interested in using them as nests, so nobody wanted to recycle them. There was a small and narrow room in the deep end of a gloomy alley. The dim light in the room was not as bright as the computer screen. A skinny man was squatting in a chair surrounded by instant food, cigarette boxes, medicine bottles, laser amplifiers, and other weapons. He was staring at the computer screen in a daze, his lips moving slightly, exposing his yellowish teeth. Similar scenes occurred in a few places in the Federation of the Milky Way, as well as in the universe. A silvery white spaceship was flying toward the deep part of the starry sky at an increasingly faster speed. The engine of the spaceship was emitting a gloomy blue glow instead of a real flame. Half of the Stargate planet was illuminated by the fixed star in the universe behind it, looking like the buttocks of a young girl wearing a bare underwear. The gray-haired old man got up from the chair and lit a handmade coarse tobacco, regardless of the ban on space travel. He took 2 puffs of the tobacco forcefully, and the room was immediately filled with the choking smoke. The smoke alarm on the whole spaceship had been calibrated with the most perfect molecular collection and analysis system to ensure that the smoke produced by the tobacco products wouldn't be detected wrongly. As such, no alarm sounded. The door of the room was pushed open. A man wearing the military uniform of a lieutenant colonel walked in and said to the old man, "Headmaster, the list of candidates for the Supernova Prize needs your signature." The old man who was called the headmaster waved his hand impatiently and demanded, "What's the hurry?" The lieutenant colonel said with a bitter smile, "The list came out 20 days ago. You were in the lab on the Stargate base at the time and didn't allow us to disturb you. Now, okay. I'll sign it in a moment." The old man drove him out of the room and walked back to the light screen. Looking at the flowing data, he said, "It takes a lot of time to calculate these questions, but you left in 20 seconds. Are people so impatient these days?" A battleship was hovering in the deep part of the universe. Many battleships could be seen in the dark world visible to the naked eye. This place was at the edge of the Federation of the Milky Way, many light years away from the nearest fixed star. The gloomy space up ahead was the rumored sea of dark matter. The humans hadn't discovered the true dark matter yet, nor could they understand the principle behind the sudden appearance of those monsters in the sea of dark matter. Yet, they had already mastered a certain method, which was to use the gravitational field to form a chain and seal off the sea of dark matter where the monsters appeared most frequently. These battleships were used to set up the gravitational field and to monitor the sea of dark matter. Different from the common silvery white spaceships in the Federation of the Milky Way, these battleships were black and long and thin, with uneven surfaces, looking like rusty swords that had been eroded by the wind and rain for many years. It was because the exterior of the battleships had to be completely sealed off with the special materials to resist the invasion of the awareness of the monsters in the sea of dark matter. There was only one way to communicate with the outside world when the battleships were completely sealed off. There was a square metal box in the captain's room in the front, the surface of which was painted a striking red. To ensure the smooth flow of the information channel and to prevent accidents, the metal box was very strong and hard to destroy. However, the red metal box had been cut in half by then, and all the cables inside had been pulled out. A young woman in a military uniform stood by the side with an axe in her hand. She was panting heavily, her small face red, and the sweat beads were dripping down from her temples. Boom! The captain's room was smashed open from the outside. The captain rushed in with his subordinates and saw such a scene. "What the hell is going on? Are you crazy?" The captain rushed to the front of the young woman and yelled angrily, "Even if you are." His voice stopped abruptly. The subordinates backed out of the captain's room silently, as if they hadn't heard what he said. The young woman handed the axe to the captain and took out a bottle of water. She drank the water in large gulps, wondering if that guy would follow them in and take control of the battleship if she didn't cut it off physically. Jingju's awareness left the room, and then he left the library. Standing on the stone steps of the library, Jingju lifted his head and looked at the sky. This place was different from the neighborhood below. He could see the blue sky and white clouds, and he could see the platforms on the higher ground more clearly, and he could even vaguely see some village-like buildings. Looking up, he passed through the clouds and arrived in outer space. Just like usual, there were several battleships hovering there. That person was actually an officer of the battleship, using the military network. No wonder it was a bit troublesome. Getting into the battleship's network took him quite a bit of time. Just as he was about to establish effective control, the information channel was cut off. He could imagine what the other party did, and he somewhat admired that person's decisiveness. Jingju retracted his gaze, walked onto the lawn, and headed towards the forest. Noises could be heard from not far away, occasionally accompanied by whistles and mocking laughter. Her silver hair was very eye-catching, as if it was burning in the twilight. The silver-haired girl's willpower didn't burn. She lowered her head, standing in front of the crowd and receiving her teacher's lecture. Jingju saw that her lips were pursed very tightly. Very stubborn but not weak. This made him think of Zhao Liu and Lu Shisui. I heard that you've been writing recently? Not even paying attention to your studies. Not even paying attention to your cultivation. What are you going to do? Or do you have the confidence to break through? Come. Let the students see what state you are in now. The criticisms, which were common in any world, echoed on the lawn. Jingju waved his hand. There was a soft clank sound. The Yuan Qi testing apparatus broke into two pieces and then exploded with a boom. The lawn was in chaos, with screams breaking out one after another. The teachers and students scattered in all directions in fear. The fire was small at first, but it grew fiercer. Illuminated by the twilight, the fire looked like the occasional sun in the sky. Jingju came to the other side of the forest and flew down the cliff, without turning his head to take a look. The ear-piercing grinding sounds rang out in the room of the apartment building. On the cupboard, the yellow cat in the photo opened his eyes wide, as if he didn't understand what had happened to his master that day. With her head lowered, Zhong Lizi scraped the leftover food in the container with a plastic spoon. The noise was quieter than what she had made in the canteen that day. She suddenly came back to her senses and lifted her head to take a look. Jingju was leaning against the other end of the chair, asleep. She thought he had been writing and studying the textbooks too hard these days. She entered the room after saying her apologies soundlessly to Jingju while holding her hands together. Jingju opened his eyes and looked at the tightly closed door, deep in thought. Chapter 774. To put it more precisely, Jingju could go back to the days when he was at the Shenhua Peak, lying on the chair and sleeping every day from this afternoon. He had absorbed a great deal of data from the interplanetary network and the hidden network, so he needed some time to digest them. It was dark for others when they closed their eyes, but he could read books with his eyes closed. When Zhong Lizi thought that he was asleep, he was reading a book on physics written by a deceased master at the Science Academy of the Federation of the Milky Way. Jingju had witnessed the scene on the lawn. He knew the reason why the girl with silvery hair was in a bad mood. Though the Yuanqi testing instrument was destroyed, she was well aware of her cultivation state. The initial state of the humans in the Federation of the Milky Way was divided into 12 levels. The students at the New Era Institute had to enter the 6th level before they could become the exchange students and learn the advanced cultivation methods at the higher universities. If they could break through the 12th level at the university, they would be qualified to enter the weightless environment of the space and strive for a higher cultivation state. Zhong Lizi was in the 4th level at the moment, far from the 6th level. She had been in poor health since her childhood, suffering from a serious blood disease. Her gene modification was unsuccessful, so cultivation was extremely difficult to begin with. As a result, her improvement in her cultivation state had slowed down considerably. It was not because the silver-colored computer had opened up a brand new interplanetary network for her, nor was it because of the endless fashion magazines and cosmetics shopping information that delayed her cultivation. It was because she had never had any hope in her cultivation state. It wasn't until she was criticized by that teacher in public this afternoon that she came back to her senses and began to take the matter seriously. She was like a fish that was about to fall into the bottom of the cliff and finally began to wiggle its tail with all its might, but most of the fish had become the corpses at the bottom of the waterfall in the end. Jingju's gaze fell on the wooden door. He saw through it easily and saw the scene inside. Zhonglizi wore a blue camisole and tight pant. She was standing on one foot with her eyes closed, her left leg slightly bent, posing in a strange posture. The thermostat in the room had not been repaired yet, so the wind was strong at times and weak at others. Her silvery hair tousled in the wind one moment and drooped down the next, which was probably similar to her mood at the moment. About 10 minutes later, she put down her left leg and panted twice painfully, and then posed in another posture. This was the most basic cultivation method in the Federation of the Milky Way. The principle was to stimulate the potential of the body to the extreme and then to nurture the energy. The qi mentioned here was vitality. When yuan qi accumulated to a certain level, the strength of the human body would be greatly enhanced. Only then would one be able to freely control their body in low gravity or even in space. If he cultivated to the stage of releasing inner qi, which was the latter half of the 12th level of the initial realm, he would be able to learn combat skills in that kind of environment. As far as Zhonglizi was concerned, it would be something that would never happen in the future. Jingjiu did not know the general knowledge of cultivation in this world because he did not care. Over the last few days, Jingjiu had chosen to ignore the knowledge related to cultivation on the internet. However, he had heard Zhonglizi mention it a few times. Looking at the exhausted silver-haired girl in the room, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows, thinking that this was even worse than the fist technique practiced by the Outer Sanctum disciples at the South Pine Pavilion. However, this was clearly not a problem with the cultivation method. Rather, the human bodies in this world were too weak. However, the thin and slender body under the blue camisole was somewhat pleasing to the eye. Jingjiu pulled back his gaze and closed his eyes to continue studying the special book on physics. Meanwhile, he was thinking about which paper he should start with. It didn't take long before the door of the room was pushed open. Zhonglizi walked out from the room. She opened the refrigerator and opened a bottle of ale. She gulped down half of the bottle and belched loudly, a pleasant expression showing on her face. The belch echoed in the room for at least 1.5 seconds before dispersing completely. Zhonglizi was startled as well. Her face blushed. It was unclear if it was because of the alcohol or her embarrassment. Jingjiu opened his eyes and asked her, "Have you finished practicing?" The embarrassment on Zhonglizi's face turned into frustration as she said, "I can't even complete 10 basic movements, and the test is coming soon. How can I pass the 6th level?" Jingjiu intended to say something, but he didn't in the end. Zhonglizi sat by Jingjiu with the ale in her hand. "How did you practice?" she asked him while staring into his eyes. He had said that he was in the 11th level of the initial realm. Almost none of the students of his age at the New Era Institute had passed the 6th level. Even if the cultivation resources up there were much better than here, his talent was still a little too exaggerated. Perhaps he had some kind of secret from the aristocratic families. She thought to herself. Jingjiu thought to himself, "Even if I tell you how I practice, you won't be able to learn it." He asked, "How do you practice?" Seeing that Jingjiu was willing to answer her question, Zhonglizi felt energized. She put the cup of ale under the tea table and got closer to Jingjiu. She told Jingjiu about her cultivation and said in the end, "It is said that the profundity of the fire-observing state lies in the fact that one can see the fire clearly. Only when the Zhen Yuan is circulating inside one's body and can reflect on oneself can one enter the 6th level, but I can't do it no matter what. It's not as clear as watching the fire." Jing Jiu stepped back and said, "It's watching the fire from the other side of the river." Zhong Lizi was taken aback, wondering if the name of the fire-observing state could be explained in such a manner. Suddenly, she thought that Jing Jiu might have used this method to express his attitude. "Isn't watching you die the same as watching you burn? What does your matter have to do with me?" Zhong Lizi thought she had understood what Jing Jiu was implying. She stood up, feeling bored, and went back to her room with the bottle of ale in her hand. Jing Jiu took a look at the closed door of the room, and decided not to bother with her anymore. What Jing Jiu said about watching the fire from the other side of the river had a deeper meaning. To reflect on oneself, one must first enter a trance and calm down their inner yuan. Only then would they be able to use their spiritual awareness to check on their own bodies. This was the method of the Zen sects to enter a trance state, and the sword work would eventually lead to the sword ghost way. If Zhao Liu and Lu Shisui had heard these words, they would have understood it instantly, and Yuan Chu would have understood it after thinking about it for a while. Yet, this girl with silvery hair didn't understand it at all. Her aptitude was extremely poor. In the dead of night, Jing Jiu opened his eyes and rubbed between his brows. He got up, pushed open the door, and walked to the bedside, looking at the girl with silvery hair coughing under a thin quilt. After looking at her for a while and making sure that the toxins in her blood had not multiplied and expanded, Jing Jiu waved his hand to let her fall into a deep sleep. He listened to the unpleasant sounds coming from the air vent of the fake window, which sounded like the bellows. Jing Jiu took off the dust cover and used his fingers as tools to repair the thermostat in a short time. Then, he came to the head of the bed and picked up a wet paper towel to wipe off the dust and oil stains on his fingers, and then pointed his finger toward the center of Zhong Lizi's brows. The tip of his finger emitted a warm glow. It looked more like a pearl than a firefly. The light from the pearl gradually passed through the wall and entered the girl's body through the center of her brows. Zhong Lizi furrowed her brows slightly, seemingly in pain, but she didn't wake up. Jing Jiu pulled back his finger, picked up the bottle of ale on the cabinet, and turned to leave the bedroom. After throwing the bottle of ale into the dustbin, Jing Jiu was about to lie on the chair and continue reading the textbook on physics, but he suddenly found that his tracksuits were a bit dirty. The tracksuits were stained with dust and oil stains when he repaired the thermostat. The words of the brand on the chest of the tracksuits looked like they had been scribbled by someone, looking very uncomfortable. Jing Jiu had devoted all his attention to his studies in the last few days, so he was a bit tired and easily distracted. He ignited the sword fire reflexively in an attempt to burn the oil stains and dust off the tracksuit. In the next moment, he remembered that this was not Chaotian, and the tracksuits were not the white sword robe made of the natural worm silk. Chi! He turned into a burning man, illuminating the room and the dark and gloomy street outside the window. If someone happened to be nearby and peeped at him with the telescope, they would be blinded by the light. The tracksuits, made of a mixture of synthetic fiber and artificial cotton, were burned into a puff of green smoke under the exceedingly high temperature of the sword fire, leaving nothing behind, not even ashes. Looking at the photo in the cabinet and his own reflection in the eyes of the large yellow cat, Jing Jiu thought that he would have to go to the street to pick up a new set of clothes. The next morning, Zhong Lizi woke up before the alarm clock had rung. She got up and walked to the door, but she found something odd. She didn't stay in bed that day, nor did she feel tired. She didn't even rub her eyes or stretch her body. She didn't even yawn or curse. What was going on? When she found that the bottle of wheat wine she had drunk the day before had been thrown into the dustbin, she felt even more bewildered. It was then that Jing Jiu walked out of the study room. Seeing the white tracksuits on his body, she asked curiously, When did you buy the new clothes? The day before yesterday, replied Jingjiu casually. Zonglizi didn't think too much about it. She washed up as quickly as she could, ate breakfast and took the medicine. Then she found that she could do things very quickly, and she didn't have any intention of slacking off. I'm filled with an unknown force, she continued while looking at Jingjiu. I think this force is called hope. Jingjiu said after some thought, It's up to you. The street lamps shone on the dark and gloomy street. The birds chirped softly, waking up the desolate world. The two of them brought the silvery computer to the school. Zonglizi's mental state was obviously different from a few days ago. She walked with the wind, her silvery hair tousling. She leaped onto the cliff, walked through the woods and the lawn, and arrived in front of the library. She turned around and waved goodbye to Jingjiu, saying, I'll try my best. I'll definitely succeed. You have to try your best too. Jingjiu thought of the female characters in the comics he had read on the internet, and thought that he had indeed infused some yuanqi into her yesterday. Was this the origin of the girl with yuanqi? I wish everybody a happy and full of yuanqi every day. After entering the new world, I've been writing happily every day, ha 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 ha. Chapter 775. Jingjiu entered the library, but he didn't go to the reading room like he had done before. Instead, he sat down in the grand hall. The reason he sat in the grand hall was because he wanted to hear the reactions of the people around him. Though he could hear their reactions while sitting in the reading room, he was worried that he might miss something. He had posted the book on many forums when he installed the false digital coordinates and information bridges on the upper level of the Stargate base and the interplanetary network the day before. It had been his intention all along to let the book spread in the Federation of the Milky Way. According to Zonglizi, one had to buy the right of access with the information points in order to post the book on those forums, and it had to be checked and verified. Since it was so troublesome, it was unnecessary to do so. With his current technology, the administrators of the forums had no way to discover the traces of the manipulation in the background, so they wouldn't delete the book for no reason. One day and one night had elapsed. The book should have caused a great deal of discussion. If the Ascendants were hiding in the Federation of the Milky Way, it wouldn't take long for them to find the book. It was true that Jingjiu had used the word hiding in his mind. He didn't find any records about the Ascendants on the interplanetary network, nor did he find any records in the hidden network. He didn't even find any records about the Ascendants on the interplanetary network. After sitting in the grand hall for a while, Jingjiu was certain that nobody was talking about the book. He felt a rare sense of disappointment. Back in the reading room, he connected the optical cable to the silvery computer and inserted his finger into the data port of the computer. He started searching with his eyes closed. He had searched hundreds of forums in a short time and read all the replies and comments. He paid attention to the number of likes and found that few people had responded. As for the private messages from the film and television companies, the animation companies and the gaming companies, he didn't receive any. Time passed slowly. The book titled The Path Toward Heaven had finally drawn some attention. In the grand hall of the library, Jingjiu heard the discussions of the students of the New Era Institute again. They were not discussing the origin of Zonglizi this time, but the story itself. Some students didn't understand where she got so much money that she could buy the right of access to the upper-level network and post the book on so many forums. Jingjiu thought that this was indeed a problem. He walked into the reading room, connected to the internet, and began to modify the copyright notices on various forums. He added the word reproduced to the title, and at the same time, retained the original author's name and private contact information. The last website he modified was a local website on the Stargate base. After uploading the copyright notice, he analyzed the data casually and noticed that a user stayed on the page for a long time, much longer than the average. Maybe this person was very meticulous and read the story as a transcendental literature that won the Supernova Prize. Or maybe this person was so tired from work that he fell asleep the moment he opened the page and woke up the next day. There was another possibility, and that was that this person was the ascender he was looking for. Without hesitation, Jingju followed the traces left behind by the user. Very soon, he encountered a barrier. This did not make him feel troubled, but instead increased his confidence. If there wasn't a problem, why would ordinary internet users set up such a barrier? It took him only a very short time, so short that he couldn't even perceive it, to break through the barrier and arrive at the local network of the opponent. But he found that he was wrong. This was the internal network of a gaming company. No wonder there was a data filtering barrier. And the user was an ordinary employee in the planning department of a gaming company. Jingju found a few documents on the computer of the employee and understood why the employee was so interested in the path toward heaven. This gaming company was called the Twirling Rain Company, the largest gaming company on this planet. It had sponsored the military, the government, the relevant institutions, the universities, and even the priest families, and was quite famous in the Federation. This gaming company was quite ordinary in the company. It had produced 2 failed games in a row, and was on the verge of being shut down. It was in urgent need of a popular game to save itself. There were countless novels, comics, movies, and TV shows on the interplanetary network. Among them, the works that had a great influence on society and could be adapted from them had already been cut off by the big companies. The copyright operation department of the Twirling Rain Company of course had many works, but they would only keep them for those studios with excellent performances. How could they give them to this studio that was on the verge of being shut down? As such, the members of this studio had no choice but to search for a cheap and good adapted work. What did it mean to be cheap and good adapted work? It meant to be a newcomer who knew nothing. Or a dreamer. The employee found the novel Chaotian on a forum. He liked it very much and he thought it would be easy to adapt it. Though the xianxia genre was not as popular as it had been, it still had a fixed audience. The story was simple and interesting. As long as the author didn't change the map or the setting, it would be popular. However, he didn't have the right to buy the copyright. All he had was the right to suggest it. Even if the studio wanted to buy the copyright, they had to submit a report to the top management of the company and apply for a budget. If the company approved the application, he would contact the author of the original work on behalf of the studio as soon as the process started. This would expand the influence of the story and let more people know about the sceneries, sex, and people in Chaotian, which would make it easier for the ascendants to discover it. Jingjiu was of course willing to do it. As he continued reading the monograph on physics, he paid attention to the private messages, waiting for the employee to contact him. It was noon. He walked out of the library and took a look at the battleships in the sky. It was unclear whether it was the feeling of not being able to achieve anything or the feeling of reading the monograph on physics, but he suddenly felt rather frustrated. If he waited for the other party to contact him, how long would it take? He shouldn't stay here any longer. He turned around and went back to the library. He connected to the internet and began to hack into the gaming company called the Twirling Rain Company. After dismantling a few firewalls, he accessed the high-sequence data platform of the Twirling Rain Company easily and read the report submitted by the studio. In terms of visual images, the report looked like it was pressed under a pile of reports as high as a mountain. Nobody would be able to see it until it was crushed to pieces. Jingjiu pulled out the report and put it on top of the pile. After some thought, he found it was still too slow to do so. As such, he checked the administrative procedures of the Twirling Rain Company and determined that the report had to go through at least 7 departments before it could be approved. Going through the administrative procedures was the most troublesome thing. The larger the company, the more troublesome it was. It was a nightmare for the employees of the company. As far as Jingjiu was concerned, it was a simple matter. He sent the report to the 7 departments in turn and copied the electronic signatures of the heads of the 7 departments. Then he wrote a few words in the name of the chairman of the Twirling Rain Company. Finally, he wrote the word agreed. Technically speaking, he was not worried that it would be discovered by others or that it would be exposed later. Such a small game and a project with such a small budget would be as inconspicuous as a rat in the gutter in a big company of this level. After some time, the heads of the departments and the chairman of the board would forget that they had never read the report when they saw the project. Of course, the essential reason was that he didn't care even if the Twirling Rain Company discovered the problem. He believed that the studio would soon receive the approval of the application and contact the author after getting the money. Then, they would develop the game as quickly as possible and promote it to the whole Federation of the Milky Way. Jingjiu had a good idea, but he didn't know one thing. The chairman of the Twirling Rain Company was a member of the Committee of the Federation of the Milky Way. He lived in the main galaxy all year round and seldom cared about the affairs of the company. Jingjiu was in a good mood when he thought that an ascendant colleague would come to find him soon, most likely to be the Snow Girl. After he returned to the apartment in the evening, Jingjiu opened a bottle of ale and had a sip. He tasted it and found it tasteless, so he handed it to Zhonglizi. Zhonglizi didn't see him drink the ale. She took the bottle and drank it, thanking him. Jingjiu waved his hand to indicate that she didn't mind. He lay back in the chair and continued reading the book with his eyes closed. Zhonglizi didn't want to disturb his rest. She entered the room with the bottle of ale in her hand and resumed her cultivation. A surprised scream broke out in the apartment in the middle of the night, followed by the sound of the door being pushed open. Zhonglizi came before the chair like a gust of wind and shook Jingjiu awake. I've passed the 5th level, she exclaimed excitedly. Chapter 776. Though there was no Yuanqi testing apparatus in the house, everybody should be aware of their own condition. Jingjiu was worried that she would make a wrong judgment due to her excessive Yuanqi, so he shot her a glance nonetheless. She was still wearing the same blue camisole and tight trousers that accentuated her curve. After making sure that she had succeeded, Jingjiu pulled back his gaze and said, "Congratulations." This congratulation was said without any emotional fluctuation, and she couldn't sense his sincerity. Yet, Zhonglizi was fully aware that he was such a person. It was a great honor for him to be willing to congratulate her. She jumped up twice happily and exclaimed in delight, "How come I can pass the 5th level? The test will be held in a few days. Can I still break through the state in such a short period of time?" It was indeed difficult to break through the state consecutively from the 4th level to the 6th level in such a short period of time. It was understandable that she lacked confidence. Jingjiu had nothing to say. He had opened a channel for her and infused some Yuanqi into her body. Yet, she had only passed the 5th level, and she even doubted that she could pass the 6th level. Zhonglizi calmed down from the joy, but she was too calm. She sat in the chair and looked at the large yellow cat in the photo on the cupboard, remaining silent for a long time. In fact, she had found some hope. Other girls are proud and aloof because they are good-looking and beautiful. It's because they are confident. But I'm not such a person. I have an inferiority complex. Having said this, Zhonglizi suddenly burst into tears. She kept wiping her tears with her hands, but she couldn't wipe them clean. Her silvery hair was stuck to her face by her tears and sweat, looking a bit sorry and pitiful. It was true that she had an inferiority complex. It was because her mother had died a long time ago. Her father had died a dishonorable death. She didn't even know where her little yellow cat had died. She was very poor, and she was sick and could die at any moment. This family had been happy before, but it had been tense later, and now it was desolate, even though Jingjiu had joined the family. Her silvery hair was not due to her illness. It was dyed, and the roots of her hair had gradually turned black. It was because she needed to be different from others to conceal her weakness, like her proud and aloof nature. However, she was only a 16-year-old girl after all. She couldn't hold it in any longer. Today, at the moment she broke through to the 5th rank, she finally burst into tears. Jingju leaned back in his chair and looked at the silver-haired girl in silence. He didn't say anything, nor did he try to comfort her. The lives of mortals were very short. In a sense, as long as they were awake enough, they were living from death every day. This girl was sick. Knowing that her life was even shorter, this feeling of helplessness became stronger. It was indeed hard to live like this. Don't worry. You'll become an exchange student. When you go to the university above, you'll have enough credits to perform gene optimization. Jingju thought. Of course, this may not be necessary. He got up and opened a clean bottle of beer and handed it to her. Jingju had finally left the comfortable chair and followed Zhong Lizi to the Institute of Cultivation on the day of the test. He had spent most of his time at home in the last few days, except for going to the library to collect some materials and check out the examination procedures of the gaming company called the Twirling Rain. It would take a long time for him to absorb the knowledge in his mind. Zhong Lizi felt surprised, but she soon figured out the reason. She turned the hood of the tracksuit over her head, blushing slightly. Jingju reached out his hand and pulled the hood to the back of her head. "It's fine as long as you're fast," he said while staring into her eyes. The place where the test was held was the gymnasium, not the crowded lawn. It had nothing to do with the explosion of the testing apparatus. It was because the test had to go through a comprehensive examination in addition to the strength and Yuanqi value. The first test was the control of the body. Besides the 10 postures that Zhong Lizi had practiced in the apartment, the most important test was the ability to pass the test in a low-gravity environment. There was a special low-gravity environment in the gymnasium. The students participating in the test would enter the environment one by one and perform various movements under the guidance of the examiners. The movements looked simple, and the environment was not complicated, but only those students who could maintain a steady flow of Yuanqi could do it in a low-gravity environment. The New Era Institute was located in the deep part of the Earth's mantle, close to the center of the Earth. It was a low-gravity environment to begin with, so the students' daily walking was like practicing. As a result, their performance was quite outstanding. The examiners from above were used to such a scene. All they did was take notes mechanically, without showing any astonished emotion. Many students participated in the test, and many others didn't participate for various reasons. They were all watching the show in the gymnasium. Seeing their classmates climbing and riding at a slow speed under the cliff, they screamed and cheered from time to time. Leaning against a small door of the gymnasium, Jingju looked in that direction quietly with the hood covering his face. His silver hair was tied up tightly that day, swaying at a very slow speed under the low-gravity environment. It looked like the slow-motion scenes in the movies. Under such circumstances, anything that would affect the balance would be troublesome. The braid was not the tail of an animal. One couldn't control which way it swayed. Seeing this scene, Jingju thought of Zhao Liu, thinking that it was a good decision to cut his hair short. The surprised screams and scattered applause suddenly broke out in the gymnasium, bringing him back to his senses. Zhong Lizi had passed the last and most difficult test. She jumped down from the rope and hugged a female student happily. Jingju remembered that the female student was called Lu something, and that she was a good liar. Though Zhong Lizi was fully aware that she was not a good person, she hugged her tightly, her face full of joy. By now, Jingju realized that all the children were good at lying. 7 or 8 classmates surrounded Zhong Lizi and congratulated her happily, but the atmosphere among the crowd was different. Some of them looked at her in surprise, and some didn't even try to conceal their jealousy and anger. Someone said in a mocking tone, if her father hadn't committed suicide, she wouldn't have been qualified to enter our institute. Do you know? She has been living in the underground neighborhood. You all know how strong the gravity there is. Of course she's good at it. The second test was the most common one, and it was also the most popular one among the students who were hostile to Zhonglizi. The test of source energy. The testing apparatus at the New Era Institute had exploded a few days ago. The police had investigated it for a long time, but they couldn't find any trace of human sabotage, so they had no choice but to attribute it to natural aging. The testing apparatus was very expensive. It was impossible for it to be approved the first time they applied for a budget, and it would take them a long time to go back and forth with the government. As the New Era Institute was in a dilemma, a large gaming company suddenly came to them and sponsored a brand new testing apparatus of the highest level. The institute was pleasantly surprised, not only because of the testing apparatus itself, but also because they could establish a connection with this large gaming company. As such, they wouldn't have to worry about the sponsorship in the future. The testing apparatus sponsored by the gaming company was indeed of a high level, and it could test a few students at the same time. As such, the test proceeded very quickly, just like a certain program of the gaming company. It didn't take long before it was Zhonglizi's turn. She walked to the front of the testing apparatus under the countless gazes of disdain, mockery, sympathy, and nervousness, and reached her hand into the apparatus. Then, she closed her eyes. It seemed that the discussions, mockery, and gazes of the crowd had no effect on her. Whoosh! The silvery hair tousled in the air. The crowd screamed in surprise. Unexpectedly, Zhonglizi had reached the 6th level of the fire-observing state. It was well known that among the students taking part in the test that day, only 7 had reached the 6th level, and they were all outstanding students who were thought highly of. Zhonglizi lived in the underground neighborhood and couldn't afford a private tutor, let alone any resources for cultivation. How could she advance from the 4th level to the 6th level in such a short time? At the moment, the gazes of mockery and disdain toward her had become less, replaced by more shock and bewilderment. Zhonglizi took a deep breath and walked to the last testing field. Did the discussions and gazes have no effect on her? Of course not. When she couldn't see any hope, she could hide in the shell of her silvery hair, wearing an expressionless face and pretending that she didn't care about anything. Now that she had seen a glimmer of hope, it was natural for her to feel nervous. The last test was the actual combat, which she had no experience in. As she walked into the combat field, which was completely isolated by a transparent material, her breathing had gradually calmed down, but she felt increasingly nervous. She halted her steps reflexively and turned around to look at the crowd. She didn't see that face in the crowd. Well, his face was always hidden in the shadow under the hat, not giving others a chance to see it. She could only see it when she was at home. Thinking of this, Zhonglizi felt proud and happy, the corners of her mouth curling up slightly. Just as she had said before, she was indeed very beautiful. At this moment, her silver hair fluttered in the wind and her smile rippled. Many boys in the crowd were stunned. The expression on the girl named Lu Shuiqian's face changed slightly, and then she laughed out, waving her hand toward Zhonglizi's gaze. Zhonglizi didn't heed her this time. Her gaze kept searching the crowd, but she didn't see anyone wearing a hat. As she felt disappointed, she suddenly saw a figure by the small door in the distance. She couldn't see the person's appearance clearly because he was too far away, nor could she see his face or the hat covering his face. All she could see was that he wore a white cloth. Yet, she knew it was him. The crowd in the gymnasium was noisy, but he was in the distance, leaning against the door. He was really lazy. After yesterday's chapter was published, some readers sent me a private message. They were worried that I was mocking myself for not selling my book or something. This was really just for fun. I sold my book before I started writing it. I'm really popular, I'm just using heart gestures. Chapter 777. Zhong Lizi turned around and looked at her opponent, the expression in her eyes calm and confident. He seemed to be a senior in the second year of university. It was said that his family had hired 3 private instructors, who had a high yuanqi value and a strong fighting prowess. So what? I have private instructors as well, and my yuanqi value is higher than yours. As for my fighting prowess, Zhong Lizi suddenly thought of what Jingjiu had said to her at the foot of the cliff. It's fine as long as you are fast. What did it mean? Was it a common line in the movies? Speed is the only undefeatable martial art in the world? Zhong Lizi pondered this question as she put on the protective gear. The young man said to her with a faint smile, "We should hurry up. There are at least 3 more rounds." They would have to fight so many rounds from the preliminary round to the final. It seemed that he was confident that he could make it to the end. It was unclear if Zhong Lizi was influenced by Jingjiu, but she spoke even less than before. She looked like an icy beauty. She crooked a finger at the young man. The young man was taken aback slightly, and then rushed over. Her silvery hair drifted out from the gaps in the protective gear, turning into countless glows. The surprised scream was blocked by the transparent barrier, sounding a bit muffled, like the thunder she had heard but never heard. The sound of someone falling to the ground with the heavy protective gear on was quite clear. She put down the broken wooden stick in her hand, feeling bewildered. She turned around reflexively and looked at the small door. The figure was no longer there. There was no disappointment in her eyes, but a hint of a smile. The difference between the intelligence quotients of humans and their abilities and potentials wasn't that large. What they needed most of the time was confidence and hope. Jingjiu knew that she was good enough, so he had no need to watch her any longer. He left the gymnasium and went to the empty library. In the office, he connected the internet and went to the internal network of the Twirling Rain Company. It took him a few minutes that day to complete the procedures of a large company that would take dozens of days. Normally, the project of the studio should have been started by now, but why hadn't he received the private message? He searched the internal network of the Twirling Rain Company and found a few encrypted memos. Then he found out the reason, thinking that he had caused a big commotion this time. There were gasps of surprise in the stadium, and then it became abnormally quiet. The front door was pushed open and Zhong Lizi walked out. Lu Shuiqian caught up to her and asked, "We said that we would have dinner to celebrate your victory tonight. Where are you going now?" "I want to go up there," said Zhong Lizi with a faint smile. She said she wanted to go upstairs, but in the end, she still went to the lower block first. Since Jingjiu wasn't in the library, he must be at home. She took him to a barbecue stall in the black market and ordered a lot of things, including 2 good steaks and a bottle of wine. That was real wine, made from real grapes, not cheap stuff with alcohol and flavorings. It was very expensive, almost equivalent to her monthly living expenses. However, she felt that it was worth it. She had gotten first place in the grading test and also obtained a spot as an exchange student. Of course, she had to treat Jingjiu to a good meal. The beef gave off a sizzling sound on the barbecue board, and the enticing aroma permeated the air around the stall. It was a bit tiresome for Zhong Lizi, who had been eating ration food all year round. Since Jingjiu couldn't smell the aroma with his nose, all he could do was analyze those tiny particles. The wine was poured into the plastic cup, but it didn't show its value. It looked like blood swaying slightly in the cup. Zhong Lizi took a sip of the wine and furrowed her brows, feeling that it tasted very sour. Jingjiu couldn't taste it, so he didn't drink it. As a result, it was still alright. "I'm really happy. After the exchange to the University of Stargate, I'll study hard and cultivation diligently, striving to stay there and further my studies. When I have enough credits, I'll try to go through the gene modification again." Zhong Lizi's alcohol tolerance was equivalent to a bottle of ale. She blushed after taking a few sips of the wine, and she kept talking to Jingjiu. She had intended to tell him that her illness would be cured if the gene modification was successful, but she thought that Jingju didn't know about it, so she stopped herself. Jingju listened to her quietly while sitting in the chair, paying no attention to what she was saying. Jingju was still reading in the noisy night market amidst the smoke and noise. There were countless books in his mind, enough for him to read for a long time. In the next moment, he suddenly turned to Zhonglizi and raised the wine cup in his hand, saying, "It's indeed worth celebrating." Zhonglizi didn't expect Jingju to respond. Feeling startled, she picked up the wine cup hastily and asked, "What has happened?" From her reaction, it could be seen that she was really a very smart girl, and she had a very clear understanding of this society and herself. As expected, Jingju was celebrating something else. He drank up the red wine in the cup and said, "I've solved a difficult physics question." The topic he was referring to was in the last chapter of the treatise on physics. In fact, it was not a physics question, but a conjecture put forward by that scholar. Many conjectures in physics could be verified by experiments, as long as the equipment was advanced enough. But some conjectures could also be solved by mathematical methods. Jingju didn't have a laboratory, so he used the last method. Zhonglizi didn't know the origin of the physics question Jingju mentioned, wondering if it was worth being so happy about. Jingju knew what was on her mind. After reviewing the books on physics he had read in the last few days, he said confidently, "I've solved all the physics questions in your world that can be solved." If Zhonglizi didn't know that he had an extraordinary background and an excellent student, she would think he was a psycho. She decided not to laugh at him after some thought. She put down the wine cup in her hand and picked up an edamame stained with black pepper to eat. Having eaten the 17th edamame stained with black pepper, she suddenly lifted her head and said to Jingju, "Thank you." Jingju looked at her in silence, not uttering a single word. Zhonglizi continued while staring into his eyes, "I don't know how you helped me, but I think it must have something to do with you. No matter what, thank you." Jingju said to her, "You should know that I'm making use of you." "Of course I know. I'm not an idiot." Zhonglizi let out a foolish smile and fell forward. Her head bumped heavily against the table with a thump. She was drunk after drinking only 3 small cups of red wine. Looking at her silvery hair spreading on the edge of the table, Jingju wondered if she would still remember this conversation when she woke up the next day. The owner of the barbecue stall came over with a plate of grilled eggplant in his hand, saying, "The most expensive dish is here. Well, is this little girl drunk?" Jingju uttered, "Hmm." The owner of the barbecue stall leaned back slightly, looking at Jingju expressionlessly. It took a while for Jingju to understand what he meant. He got up and walked to the opposite side of the stall, picking her up and putting her on his shoulder. The owner's face looked a bit better, saying, "I'll pack the leftovers for you." Jingju didn't have the patience to do so, but he halted his steps, thinking of the girl's daily habits. After some thought, Jingju pointed to the bowl of edamame stained with black pepper and shook his finger. "No, no, no. According to the rules and regulations of the institute, it's not a problem for the school to do so." A fat and white finger kept on shaking in front of Zhonglizi's eyes, like a maggot crawling out of a pile of dung. Zhonglizi tried her best to hold back the urge to vomit. She took a deep breath and said to the president behind the table, "I have the highest UNC value, and I won first place in the following 3 tests, but I'm not the one to be the exchange student. Are you sure it's okay?" The notice had been published on the website of the New Era Institute that it was not Zhonglizi who would go to the University of Stargate as an exchange student this year. It was a male student of the 2nd year. The students who had asked her about the secret cultivation scripts and congratulated her in the classroom fell silent. Lu Shuiqian kept on comforting her while holding her hand, her face full of sympathy. If it were any other female student, they would have run to the lawn and cried bitterly, and if it were a male student, they would have run to the forest on the other side of the lawn and pounded on the trees. They were all 15 or 16 years old. What could they do when faced with such a sudden setback in the institute and in the adult world? What would they dare do? Some of the students were different, like Zhong Lizi. It was because she had no other way out and couldn't give up this opportunity. Under the shocked gazes of the other students, she pushed open the classroom door and went to the president's office. Then, she knocked on the door politely and walked in. Your performance in the test is indeed outstanding. All the teachers have witnessed it. The top scholarship and the leaping scholarship will be yours for sure, but the quota for the exchange students is not decided in this way. The president of the New Era Institute stood up and said to her amiably, "The exchange students have to stay at the University of Stargate for half a year. Our institute is a lower one, so we have to follow their instructions. To be frank, your performance is too ordinary, and you haven't participated in any of the club activities. I can't even put in a good word for you. The University of Stargate doesn't accept you. What can I do? It's been less than 20 hours since yesterday to this afternoon, but you've sent my information to the University of Stargate. The other party has read it so quickly, and you still have time to persuade them?" Staring into the eyes of the fat president, Zhong Lizi suddenly said, "Chen Xiefeng, the exchange student 2 years ago, had an ordinary performance as well. Mo Hai, the exchange student 7 years ago, had a worse performance than me. How did they pass the test of the University of Stargate?" The fat president didn't expect this girl with silvery hair to have memorized all the information of the exchange students. He couldn't help but slap the table forcefully, yelling, "What are you yelling for? The conditions for the examination of the University of Stargate are different every year." "How would I know?" Zhong Lizi didn't give in, saying, "Now that the application is rejected, the University of Stargate must have a written notice." "Where is the notice? I want to see it." The fat president had no intention of concealing anything after being pushed to the wall. He pulled off his bow tie and cursed, "Do you think it's something you can see whenever you want? How dare you talk to a teacher like that?" He suddenly smelled something and sniffed like a dog. He looked at her and sneered, "Did you drink last night? Your whole body reeked of alcohol. A student came to school with a hangover. What kind of behavior is this? Get out." Zhong Lizi didn't try to defend herself. All she did was stare into his eyes. The fat president suddenly felt nervous. He walked over from behind the table and attempted to pat her shoulder to comfort her. Zhong Lizi took a step back to avoid his hand. The fat president felt even more embarrassed. His face turned red, and it seemed that he would explode again. Still staring into his eyes, she said, "If I had stepped back a little less and let your hand fall on my body, I would be able to sue you for sexual harassment." Glancing at the surveillance camera in the corner, the fat president's expression changed slightly when he thought of the missed opportunity. "Are you trying to frame me?" he demanded. "No, it's because I can't become someone like you." Having said that, Zhong Lizi turned around and left the president's office. This time she didn't control her emotions as she closed the door. The whole school heard a loud boom. A grayish-white aircraft landed from the sky, bringing up a gust of strong wind and stirring up a great deal of grass. Hearing the commotion, the students ran out of the classrooms and looked at the lawn while leaning on the railings, their eyes full of curiosity. A student recognized the logo on the aircraft and exclaimed in astonishment, "Why did the people of the Twirling Rain Company come to our institute?" Everybody knew about the Twirling Rain Company. It was the largest gaming company and a major sponsor of many institutions, including the University of Stargate. The company had a significant influence in the society. As Zhong Lizi walked out of the office building, she happened to see the grayish-white aircraft land and heard the discussion of the teachers and students around her. If she knew the people of the Twirling Rain Company, would she be able to change the situation? It would be better if the youth in the apartment was the illegitimate son of a high-level official of the Twirling Rain Company. She let out a wry smile and walked toward the lawn. Chapter 778. Looking at the Reverend President, Gao Shu curled up the corners of his mouth to reveal a mocking smile, but it was soon restrained. "I don't drink tea," he said solemnly. The fat president took out a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped off the sweat beads on his forehead, saying, "Please sit down then." He had no idea why someone from the Twirling Rain Company came to the institute to find him. Gao Shu was a consultant of the Public Relations Department of the Twirling Rain Company. Though the name of the department and his position sounded ordinary, he was actually in charge of handling the emergency affairs of the company and had a high authority. The reason why he had appeared in this ordinary academy was naturally because something very serious had happened. He had no intention of sitting down, but asked the president, "Was it you who decided the quota for the exchange students at the University of Stargate?" The fat president was taken aback, wondering what this matter had to do with the Twirling Rain Company. "Yes," he said with an obsequious smile. Gao Shu knew from his expression that he knew nothing, so he asked, "Why didn't you take the first place in yesterday's test?" Upon hearing this, the fat president was a bit alarmed, asking, "There must be a reason, but it's not convenient to tell you." "Consultant Gao, what do you want?" Gao Shu thought expressionlessly. "What do I want? To kill you, of course." Everything started from a few days ago. Gao Shu suddenly received a notice from the CEO's office, asking him to report to the office immediately. He went to the top floor of the headquarters building with a mixture of alertness and expectation. Without any delay, he saw the CEO, whom he had seldom seen before. The CEO didn't say anything and directly placed a project application in front of him. He thought it was not an ordinary project application, so he read it carefully, but he didn't find anything wrong with it. All the procedures were normal. Well, it was a bit too fast. Those department heads of the company were usually busy playing basketball and listening to operas. When did they become so diligent? When he saw the last few sentences and the signature on the last page, he finally understood the real content of the test. "My father-in-law is striving for the welfare of the populace of the Federation. I haven't seen him for 2 years. What do you think he means by doing this?" Upon hearing the CEO's direct question, Gao Shu answered after thinking for a long time. The CEO hasn't been concerned about the specific business for many years. The few sentences of his instructions seemed concrete, but they were actually quite vague. "This project must be done well, but we can't let too many people know about it, not even the author." The CEO looked at him appreciatively and said, "That's what I mean." Regardless of the relationship between the silver-haired girl named Zhong Lizi and the chairman of the board, it was inconvenient for them to ask about it, and they didn't dare investigate it. However, it didn't stop them from coming up with countless stories in their mind. The silver-haired girl's parents had both died, and she had lived in a neighborhood in the lower class since her childhood. This story could be quite interesting. The CEO quickly made a decision. No matter how badly written the book, The Path Toward Heaven, was, they had to buy it. However, they had to do it properly so that the other party wouldn't find out. The project would still be carried out by the studio, and the public relations department where Gao Shu worked would quietly obtain the copyright of the book without arousing any suspicion from the other party. How could he convince a young lady to sell her copyright? Of course, it was easiest to throw money at them. But if the chairman wanted to give money to the little girl, he had to go through so many twists and turns. As his son-in-law and subordinates, how could they dare to give it directly? Gao Shu was good at this kind of thing. When he learned that the little girl wanted to obtain the quota of exchange students at the University of Stargate, he was prepared to approach her in this way. After the testing apparatus at the New Era Institute broke down, he asked someone to sponsor a new one in order to ensure that the grading test wouldn't be delayed. As he was about to add a quota of exchange students to the New Era Institute the night before, he suddenly received the news that the little girl had obtained it by herself. Gao Shu felt surprised, delighted, and taken for granted. He called the University of Stargate and reserved the quota of exchange students for next year. Unexpectedly, the latest news at noon was that the little girl had failed to be selected. Gao Shu was certain that the chairman wouldn't say anything if he couldn't handle the matter well, but the CEO would fly to the main planet to ask for forgiveness. What would happen to him then? Looking at the fat president, Gao Shu forced himself to calm down and said, "President, please change the name list. I'll reward you handsomely." The president had given the quota of exchange students to someone else because he had been asked to do so. "The name list has already been submitted. I have no choice," he said awkwardly. Gao Shu said expressionlessly, "I've asked my friends in the education ministry to stop the name list. You can check it out. It's not too late to change it." The expression on the president's face changed slightly. He turned on the computer and asked, "What do you mean?" "The company hopes that the student Zhong Lizi can get the quota," said Gao Shu expressionlessly. Jingju said such tough words expressionlessly. The president felt humiliated, saying angrily, "He is an exchange student of the University of Stargate. No matter how formidable your twirling rein is, it's impossible for you to control her. Do you think this is something your family can decide alone? Our company is the biggest sponsor of the University of Stargate. But what you said is right. This is not something our family can decide alone. The military, the government, and the science academy can also decide." Gao Shu leaned forward slightly and continued, while staring into his eyes, "But don't forget that this is something we can decide, not something you lowly rats can decide." The president had gradually come back to his senses, his breathing growing more rapid. Gao Shu said to him expressionlessly, "If you don't want this institute to have no quota for exchange students from next year onward, and if you don't want your children to have no chance of going to the university, you can choose not to accept my suggestion." The president took out a handkerchief and wiped the sweat off his face and neck carelessly, saying in a hoarse voice, "Please, please wait for me a moment." Having said that, he rushed out of the president's office as quickly as he could. Looking at the figure on the lawn disappearing into the distance, he waved the wet handkerchief with all his might, yelling, "Student Zhong, please wait a moment." Zhong Lizi had almost reached the patch of forest by then. She would be able to descend the cliff along the stone steps or jump off the cliff after passing through the forest. Hearing the voice behind her, she spun her head around and saw the scene. She couldn't help but raise her eyebrows in disgust, but also curiosity. The black market and the night market sounded similar, but they were in fact two completely different concepts. However, the night market was actually a part of the black market in the underground neighborhood. It was still the same barbecue stall, and the customers ordered the best steaks and vegetables. The only difference was that the alcohol was the rice wine with a low alcohol content, but it wasn't cheap either. The eggplant was the first to be served. Zhong Lizi didn't know that the boss was worried that she would get drunk again and miss the taste of the most expensive eggplant that had just been roasted. "Thank you," she said after staring at Jingjiu for a long time. "Thank you," she said after staring at Jingjiu for a long time. "I don't know what's going on either. The Twirling Rain Company read the book you wrote, and they came to the institute. The president said that it was considered a social achievement and could be rewarded with extra points. As such, he gave the quota of exchange students back to me." She continued in a low voice after looking around, "In fact, I know that the Twirling Rain Company must have exerted pressure on him." Jingju uttered He didn't know until yesterday that the approval and signature of the chairman of the board of directors he had impersonated had caused so many troubles. "But I don't understand why they did it. It's the Twirling Rain Company. Is it because of the copyright of the game?" Zhong Lizi tore the eggplant in half with the tip of her chopsticks and took a bite. "I didn't agree with them," she said indistinctly. "Why?" asked Jingjiu. Feeling baffled, Zhong Lizi said, "It's you who wrote the book, so I have to listen to you." But the price they offered is really good. Agreeing to it means they are trying to please you, said Jingjiu. Zhongli was baffled, asking, why do they want to please me? Jingjiu said, the book is written very well, but you don't believe it. After some thought, Zhongli still thought this reasoning was unreliable. She didn't want to think about it further. She raised the rice wine in her cup and said generously, all in all, thank you very much. I'll drink 3 cups in a row. Jingjiu thought that she would be drunk after 3 cups based on her drinking capacity, but he didn't bother to persuade her otherwise. The boss of the barbecue stall came over with a plate of roasted mushrooms in his hands. He happened to see Zhongli drinking the wine. He turned around slowly and looked at Jingjiu expressionlessly. Jingjiu stared at him expressionlessly, indicating that it had nothing to do with him. Soon, Zhongli had drunk 3 cups of rice wine. She behaved much better than the other day. Though her face was slightly red and her eyes looked a bit bewildered, she didn't collapse. Jingjiu was certain that she was not completely drunk. No need to thank me, he said again patiently. I'm just making use of you. Zhongli waved her hand after eating a skewer of pork tendon, saying, I know. It's meaningless to talk about it all the time. Having said that, she picked up a cup of rice wine and poured it into her stomach, and then slammed it on the table with a thud. The cultivation methods in this world were truly useless. One could even get drunk after drinking the wine. Thinking of this, Jingjiu got up and walked to the other side of the table. He put her on his shoulder, and then looked at the boss of the barbecue stall expressionlessly. The boss of the barbecue stall nodded expressionlessly. Jingjiu turned around expressionlessly and walked toward the other end of the dark street. Chapter 779. In the middle of the night, the painful moans of a young girl and the sound of her asking for water could be heard in the bedroom. Jingjiu was reading the mathematical papers of the Science Academy while lying on the chair with his eyes closed. He didn't pay any attention to her voice. Even if he didn't do anything, he wouldn't take care of her. He had never taken care of anyone in his life, save for Nan Wang, who was too drunk, and the severely wounded Sanyu. He had only wiped the face of Bai Zhao before his ascension. Zhongli staggered out of the door and took out a bottle of water from the refrigerator. She drank a few mouthfuls of it to sober up a bit. How come you're so drunk? Isn't it rice wine? Jingjiu opened his eyes and said, the alcohol content is 3 times that of beer. Upon hearing this, Zhongli was startled, exclaiming, such a high alcohol content? No wonder you have a headache. As she said this, she sat on the chair and hugged the cushion, taking up a lot of space and squeezing Jingjiu's feet off the chair. Jingjiu wondered why this child was even more domineering than Zhao Lei. Hey! I suddenly remembered that I forgot to tell you something important. You're the author. I have to make a statement. The Twirling Rain will pay you a lot of money. I have money. Don't you want the authorship? If I were the author, would the Twirling Rain help you get the quota of exchange students? Holding the cushion, Zhongli said while staring into Jingjiu's eyes. In fact, I've been wondering if you really need the quota of exchange students, or if you want to attract the attention of some important figures in the upper echelons so that they can take you back. Otherwise, why did you write it? Why do I have to go to the upper echelons? Asked Jingjiu. Thinking of the story she had imagined over the last few days, Zhongli asked nervously, is it because you want to take back what belongs to you, like your clan or your company? Jingjiu said while looking at her, don't watch it anymore, you'll become stupid. Most of the TV shows were not very useful. One would become stupid if they watched them all day long. The most useless thing was the TV shows. Only an idiot would watch them all day long. In the last few days, Jingjiu hadn't turned on the TV except during the time when the news was broadcasted. However, he turned on the TV when his mathematical research was interrupted by Zhongli and he didn't want to listen to her nonsense. He thought to himself, I'll take it as a celebration for solving all the physics problems in this world that can be solved. The screen quickly stabilized. The high-resolution image was almost no different from reality. The only difference was that it was not three-dimensional. A variety show was being broadcast on the TV. It was held in a huge stadium, and the audience was like a mountain or a sea, intoxicated and crazy. Jingjiu took a few glances and estimated that there were more than 116,000 people in the audience. He couldn't help but feel surprised. Zonglizi walked out from the toilet. Seeing the scene on the TV, she couldn't help but cry out in surprise. It's the primary election. I really drank too much. He actually forgot that today is the day of the primaries. Each large region and planetary base in the Federation of the Milky Way had a female priest. The priestess position was extremely high. It was said that she was responsible for passing down the remains of the ancient civilization. This year was the year when the female priest of the Stargate would be replaced. The so-called replacement actually meant that the female priest was old and on the verge of death. The new female priest would select 3 candidates from all over the planet, and the previous female priest would appoint the candidate. The grand ceremony was usually held in October, and it was called the water sacrifice. Without a doubt, the selection of the new female priest was the most important event on this planet this year. It had already attracted the attention of countless people since the beginning of the primary election. It was then that the TV was playing a replay of the primary election in a district on the 3rd level. Zonglizi pulled the cushion out from under her buttocks and held it in her bosom, saying excitedly, "The exchange students will stay at the University of Stargate for half a year. We might be able to watch the October water sacrifice in person." She suddenly thought of something and said dejectedly, "But the tickets must be in high demand. Where can we get them?" In the next moment, her eyes beamed again. She said to Jingjiu, "If the Twirling Rain Company uses your tickets, they should be able to help us if we ask them for the tickets." The young woman's mood had changed 3 times in a short time. It might be because of the relaxation brought about by the alcohol, but it was mostly because of the attraction of the October water sacrifice. Though Jingjiu didn't care about the October water sacrifice, he thought of something else. He took out a pen and paper from under the tea table and wrote a word on it. Zonglizi leaned over to take a look curiously. She found that the word month had been added to the word year and robot on the paper. "What do you want to find? Don't tell me who I am. What is a year? Why are there 12 months in a year? Why are there 365 days in a year? Why are there no moon on the other side?" Hearing these questions from Jingjiu, Zonglizi was taken aback, thinking that the history of the human civilization had been recorded in this way since the revival of the civilization. Perhaps it had something to do with the distant ancient civilization. It was not suitable for her to ponder such a complicated question when she was drunk. She shook her head a little to forget these questions and the 3 words on the paper, and started watching the TV. The first item in the preliminary contest for the selection of female priest was rather old-fashioned, similar to the quiz contest for elementary school students. The questions didn't involve any innovation or divergent thinking, and they didn't require a high IQ either. The most important part was the knowledge of the literature and history. Staring at the light screen, Zonglizi would furrow her brows whenever a question popped up, searching for the answer in her mind. Then she would yell out the answer while clenching her fists, or she would say the answer in a low voice, or she would continue to furrow her brows. When the answer came out, she would either jump up happily, or say regretfully that she knew the answer but remembered it wrongly. Or she would look at Jingjiu with a silly smile and say that she was a science major. "I know this question." Before Jingjiu could respond, she yelled while looking at the next question, "It's the Pingmo Plateau, in the northernmost area of the main planet." Jingjiu didn't care about her acting personality after drinking, but he was interested in the contents of the questions. It was probably because this was the selection of the female priest of the Stargate. Many of the questions were about the history of this planet, and they were the knowledge that the regular folks didn't care much about. Zhong Lizi suddenly thought of the 7 papers with full marks she had seen the other day. "Do you know all these questions?" she asked uncertainly while looking at Jingjiu. Jingjiu uttered The questions in the second round were much more difficult. They looked like a game. Some of them required precise manipulation, and some required a calm mind. But the foundation of the questions was the ability to deconstruct and reconstruct the space. These questions required a high IQ of the candidates, or more precisely, a high level of development of their brains. Zhong Lizi opened her eyes wide. She looked at the dispersing and recombining colors and the hundreds of cups that looked exactly the same, but she couldn't find any clue even after staring at them for a long time. She was a competitive girl. She didn't give up even though she knew the questions were beyond her ability. She was so nervous that she held her breath. Yet, Jingjiu thought the second round was not as interesting as the first one. He lay back on the chair and kicked the chair with his foot, asking her to sit farther away from him. Then he started to study with his eyes closed. "Can you do it?" Zhong Lizi exclaimed incredulously while looking at his expression. Jingjiu thought it was so easy that even He Zhan could pass the tests easily, to say nothing of Tong Yen and Cain Yang. Looking at Jingjiu's face, Zhong Lizi suddenly had an absurd idea. If he disguised himself as a young woman to participate in the selection of the female priest, he might be able to succeed in the end. As for whether others could see through his disguise, who would doubt such a beautiful person? It had taken her many days to get used to this face. Jingjiu continued reading the collection of theses. Countless symbols and figures drifted in his vision like snowflakes, reminding him of the room in the hidden network and the Shanghai Peak. The hot pot at that time tasted better than the hot pot at the Shima Peak. It was not because Gu Qing was careless, but because he had lost his sense of taste. The humans in this world were weaker than those in Chaotian. It was not because they were lazy or incapable, but because the rules of this world were different. His physical condition was the same. The strength of his body and the speed he could exert were far inferior to what they had been. After a long while, he suddenly heard a profanity. He opened his eyes reflexively and looked in that direction. Standing in front of the TV, Zhong Lizi stared at the presenter as if she were looking at an enemy. "It's a shady deal," she exclaimed while gritting her teeth. The primary selection in this area of the third level had come to an end, and the 3 candidates for the final selection had been selected. The girl she liked the most and supported the most had failed to be selected. What else could she say? She didn't need to ask. It would be a shady deal if she asked. Jingjiu fixed his gaze on the TV and found that the candidates were quite good-looking, especially the one in the middle. Even Jingjiu thought she was good-looking. She would be the most beautiful woman in the human society. Judging from the wave-like cheers of the audience and the attention of the presenter, the black-haired girl in the middle was indeed the most popular. Chapter 780. The underground neighborhood couldn't see the true morning sunlight, so they could only rely on the alarm clock to tell people that the morning had arrived. In such an environment, it was hard to imagine that the people on the entire planet could still maintain the same biological clock and social order. Whoa, whoa, whoa. The alarm clock on the cabinet rang incessantly, sounding like the roosters crowing in the middle of the night. The big yellow cat in the photo stared at the alarm clock with his black eyes wide open, wondering where the cat was hiding. Jingjiu and Zhong Lizi pushed open the door and walked out at the same time. Zhong Lizi greeted them good morning, and Jingjiu uttered Like what she had done in the past few days, Zhong Lizi washed her face and rinsed her mouth, took the medicine, fetched the breakfast and brewed the tea. Jingjiu piled the cushions together and leaned against the chair to watch the news. If their ages were ignored and Jingjiu didn't eat breakfast, They would look like a couple who had been married for more than 10 years. Yet, it was a bit different that day. Zhong Lizi was about to leave this dark and gloomy neighborhood and go to the high and distant second level to study at the University of Stargate. She wouldn't come back to this apartment building for at least half a year. "Are you sure you will come with me?" she asked with a pretense of calmness as she picked up the cup of black tea and took a sip, concealing the expectation on her face with the hot steam. Watching the news on TV about the transfer of the fleet in the distant starry space, Jingju uttered and added, "I'll come to find you after I've settled down." Zhong Lizi was a bit disappointed, but she felt elated when she thought that they would meet again soon, which was much better than parting from each other. "I'll put up the rental contract today then." Though it was an underground neighborhood far away from the prosperity and the blue sky, the government was still in effect. There was a special department responsible for renting out the apartment and collecting the rent. Now that she would be away for 6 months, she wanted to rent out the apartment and earn some money. No, Jingju objected without hesitation. He couldn't accept another man living in this apartment, and he felt even more uncomfortable when he thought that man would lean against his chair. It was for this reason that he didn't want to hand over the position of the sect master to Zhuoruzhui, even though he had predicted that Gu Qing would leave. Zhong Lizi wondered how much money they would earn if they did so. Just as she was about to blurt out, she suddenly thought of his personality and how he had already helped her so much, so she quickly shut her mouth. "I'll make it up to you." Jingju knew what she was thinking and said, 2 gold coins. Zhong Lizi wasn't willing to accept it, retorting, "Your lease hasn't expired yet, and I'm going to return the money to you. Why do you want to pay the rent?" Jingju said, "You don't have to. There are a lot of places to spend money when you go out." This was the experience he and Zhao Lei gained when they traveled the world. Whether it was staying in the first room of the inn, going to the auction house to compete for items, eating the best seafood hot pot, or renting the most comfortable carriage, all of them required money. That wasn't all. He continued, "I transferred some credits to you. These credits were transferred from the account of the owner of the gaming parlor. It was believed that nobody in the Federation of the Milky Way could find out where the money had gone to. The reason he chose the owner of the gaming parlor was not because he had discovered the source of the money was not clean, nor was it because he thought the owner had a bad temper. It was simply a habit. Since he was already familiar with the owner of the gaming parlor, there was no need to choose another person. Take the Aoyama sect as an example. Taipingzhenren, Lu Xi, and Gu Qing always went to Penglai Island to fetch a godly boat when they left Chaotian for the ocean. Was it really like what Gu Qing had said, that he owed the king of the godly boats a favor? Maybe he thought so, but Taipingzhenren, Lu Xi, and Jingju didn't think so. They were merely used to it. Habits were the most difficult mental shackles for humans, even for the highly achieved cultivation practitioners. The king of the godly boats had money and a boat anyway, so he didn't care about it. Of course, it was useless even if he cared about it. Zhong Lizi was taken aback. She checked the information on her bracelet and found that a large sum of money had been added to her account. She of course cared about this large sum of money. It was because she wanted to go to school and undergo the gene modification. All she wanted was to stay alive. She didn't try to return the money. "Thank you," she said to Jingju earnestly. She had a proud and aloof temperament regardless of whether she was at the elementary school, the middle school, or the New Era Institute. Even though she had disguised it in the beginning, it had become a habit over time. She seldom accepted help from others, so she didn't have a chance to say thank you. Since this young tenant came to her house, she had said thank you more often than she had in the past 16 years. It was because this young man had been helping her all the time, and he didn't allow her to refuse him. "Like I said, I'm making use of you, and this is the reward," said Jingju while looking at her. Zhong Lizi curled up the corners of her mouth, flashing an enchanting smile as she said, "But you haven't made use of me yet. Having said that, she walked into Jingju's bosom and hugged him tightly. She rested her head on his shoulder for a long time and didn't want to leave his bosom. It was deathly quiet in the room. The alarm clock didn't ring again, and the sound of the news had gradually died down. Jingju was quite experienced in this sort of thing. He stood there like a wooden man, his hands hanging by his sides and his eyes looking straight ahead. He breathed steadily on purpose, and his heartbeat didn't change at all. This was the so-called, "You can hug me all you want, but I won't hold your waist." It was unclear how much time had passed. It wasn't a short time, but it wasn't too long either. By the time Jingju started reading the fourth paper, Zhong Lizi had finally let go of his arms. She combed her silvery hair uneasily and turned around to go back to her bedroom. She went back to her bedroom to pack her luggage and to let the blush on her face fade a bit. It was easy to pack her luggage. The University of Stargate provided the students with room and board, as well as 4 sets of school uniforms for winter and summer. There was also a free movie theater, a gaming room, a basketball court, a gym. All in all, the university had everything the society needed, and it was free of charge. She walked out of the bedroom with only some underwear and personal belongings. She came to the front of the cabinet and looked at the big yellow cat in the photo, a reluctant expression showing in her eyes. Looking at the chair, Jingju was also reluctant to part with it. After he left Chaotian, his ability to hide the heaven and earth had lost its purpose, and he couldn't bring anything with him at any time. Even if he had gone to the Cloud Dream Mountain to get a magic space, it would have been broken during the battle against the heavenly demons of the outside world. Would he have to leave the chair here? Zhong Lizi took out a backpack and handed it to Jingju, saying, "No matter where you hide the money and belongings, be careful when you take them out. Don't let anybody see you." The backpack was made of overalls, covered with a layer of black lacquered leather. It was sturdy enough, but it didn't have a good appearance. Jingju had never cared about the appearance. He put the silvery computer into the backpack and a blue tracksuit that he hadn't seen before in the backpack, and turned to leave the apartment. The gray and white flying device left the lawn and headed toward the high sky. The platform was intermittently visible amid the layers of clouds and fog. It looked like 2 cliffs facing each other, with only the sky visible. Seeing the flying device disappearing into the clouds and fog, the students of the New Era Institute felt a complicated emotion, and they slowly stopped waving their hands. Looking at the vague marks left by the 2 flying devices on the lawn, Lu Shuiqian burst out crying for some reason and ran toward the distance while covering her face. Seeing the scene, the students were startled, thinking that she and Zhong Lizi had such a good relationship. Sitting by the window, Zhong Lizi felt nervous. She didn't want to be recognized by the middle-aged man named Gao Shu, so she turned to look at the outside of the window after covering her head with the cap of the tracksuit. She had already expressed her sorrow of parting in the apartment. She knew that Jingju wouldn't come to see her off, so she didn't take a look at the teachers and students who were as big as ants on the lawn below. This was the first time she had left the underground neighborhood. Besides feeling nervous, she also felt a lot of new things. Looking at the platforms intermittently visible amid the clouds and fog and the buildings of different styles on the platforms, Zhong Lizi's gaze was quite focused. Sitting across from her, Gao Shu looked at her intently and imperceptibly. He was increasingly convinced that the judgment of the president and himself was correct. Who could behave so calmly when leaving the underground world for the first time? She was merely 16 years old. This little girl was definitely not as simple as the information indicated. At least, her family background couldn't be that simple. It was true that her family background was quite common, though it was rather dismal. In the Federation of the Milky Way, the secondary gene modification provided by the government didn't work, and they didn't have the money to carry out the independent gene modification. As a result, too many people were killed by diseases, and even more people were driven to suicide by the scams of the fund. However, what was the relationship between her and the president on the distant main planet? The silvery gray flying device kept on ascending amid the clouds and fog. The clouds and fog were much thinner than they looked from a distance, and they were much lighter than the clouds on the ground described in the textbooks. Her gaze could pass through them easily. Looking at the outside of the window in silence, Zhong Lizi looked at the slogans of the old era painted on the steel cliff walls and the waste water seeping out from the cracks on the walls. She suddenly thought of the occasional rain in the underground neighborhood. Was this the reason? After a long while, the clouds and fog dispersed. The steel cliff walls were gradually replaced by the floating platforms of the latest model, and the two sides of the cliff grew farther apart. The most obvious change was that the blue sky above grew larger and the white clouds grew clearer, looking more and more like the scenes in the textbooks and on TV. All of a sudden, the flying device leaped up from the ground. The sun suddenly appeared outside the window and in front of Zhong Lizi's eyes. It was then that she couldn't keep her composure any longer. She opened her mouth slightly, thinking of a documentary she had watched. In the documentary, a whale in the deep sea had finally rushed out of the surface of the ocean after swimming for a long time and arrived in the sky, bellowing in an exceedingly joyful manner. However, the whale only stayed in the sky for a short while before it fell back into the ocean. In the end, it was dragged back to the harbor by the fishing boats on that planet and became a source of food and protein powder. Would she experience the same fate? The silvery gray flying device suddenly began to descend, drawing an obvious arc in the sky. She didn't know if it reminded her of the whale, or if it reminded her of the strange world she was about to step into, but she nervously grabbed her seatbelt and subconsciously looked around, but she didn't see the figure that made her feel at ease. Where was he at the moment? The people in the underground neighborhood hadn't seen the sunlight for a long time, so they thought the street lamps looked more beautiful. However, the street lamps were on day and night. As a result, the beauty of the street lamps faded away. Standing under a broken street lamp, Jingju waited for the dim sunlight to flash past in the sky for a long time. He had many mathematical papers to read, so the waiting was not a difficult task for him. As the street lamps flickered slightly, the high and dangerous steel cliff walls above him became pitch black. Jingzhou came to the end of the alley with the backpack on his back, and flew up along the rusty iron frame. The night wind pulled off the hood. Jingzhou flew faster and faster. In the blink of an eye, he had passed the plateau on the cliff where the New Era Institute was located. During this process, Jingzhou adjusted the direction of all the surveillance cameras on the way and turned off a dozen scanners among the platforms. Turning off the scanners would set off an alarm, but as long as the scanners were turned off for a short time, they would be attributed to a strong electric current fluctuation or some other inexplicable reason by the overstaffed departments. The explosion of the primordial energy detector at the New Era Institute made Jingzhou confident in the deduction he had obtained from the TV programs and book. If there were lights on the steel walls and if someone had a sharp eye, they would be able to see a marvelous scene. A youth in a tracksuit with a backpack on his back was traveling among the huge steel beams as if he was going to school. He could cover a distance of a few kilometers by tiptoeing lightly. All the scanners and the surveillance cameras were in his mind. The route he had designed was perfect. He didn't encounter any obstacles, and he didn't attract anybody's attention. It would be even easier if he turned into a sword light. However, a few battleships were hovering in a corner of the dark space, and any moving object at a speed beyond the common sense would attract their attention. Jingzhou leaped up among the huge steel beams. Like Zhong Lizi, he saw the dirty water seeping out from the cracks, the living platforms and the buildings that he could only look up at from below. In the process, he passed by a few different sealed platforms, which were made of the old-fashioned concrete and full of cracks, which might be the remnants of the ancient wars. The dark sky had gradually gained some color. It was a warm red color, like the glow of the thoughtless sword when Zhao Liu was in a good mood. Whoosh! A dark figure appeared by the edge of the huge floating platform. He passed the magnetic guardrail noiselessly and headed toward the distant metropolis. It was then that the morning sun leaped out from behind the distant mountain, illuminating the whole world. Chapter 781. The distant morning sun looked like a small red ball, looking a bit pitiful. The permanent star was a bit far away, and the surface of the ground was a bit cold. If it weren't for the protective shield above it, it would be hard for the regular humans to live here. Jingjiu pulled back his gaze and headed toward the city in front of him. Then, he found out the truth about the mountain range in the distance. The sun rose higher, illuminating the cliff walls of the mountain range that was a few thousand meters high. It was unclear what was glowing inside, looking like the stars buried in the mountain range. It was a part of the Earth's crust. It turned out that he was still on the platform on the second level of the underground world, and the real surface of the Earth was above the mountain range. A great deal of information emerged in his awareness. When the sea of dark matter invaded the underground world, the machines hidden in the side walls of the Earth's crust would be activated and connected to each other, forming a huge gravitational field. The gravitational field and the modified Earth's crust would provide the most powerful protection for the underground world. The buildings on the surface of the Earth would be abandoned, and the residents would be abandoned if they didn't have enough time to retreat to the underground world. The sea of dark matter broke through the blockade of the fleet of the Federation and came to the Stargate base a few decades ago, destroying 90% of the buildings on the surface of the Earth and killing millions of people. But the underground world didn't suffer any damage. In a sense, this was a fair method. The female priests and the government agencies living on the surface of the Earth had the most sunlight and the best sceneries, so they had to take the greatest risk. Yet, as time went by, many things had changed. The female priests still lived on the surface of the Earth, and many government agencies had moved to the second level, which was much safer and more comfortable, which was the place Jingjiu was walking on. Some agencies even wanted to move to the vicinity of the laboratory, which was close to the core of the Earth. The University of Stargate had also moved to the second level after the catastrophe a few decades ago. They claimed that they were building a branch of the university, but most of the administrators, teachers, and students were in the branch of the university. Only the cultivation students and the mecha department were left at the main university on the surface of the Earth. The ground on the second level was exceedingly spacious, with more than 10 hours of sunlight every day, and there was no need to worry about its safety. It was the best place on this planet. Jingjiu walked toward the city against the morning sunlight. He saw many single buildings and small courtyards on both sides of the street. The natural lawns were planted in the small courtyards. Though they were not as neat as the artificial lawns at the New Era Institute, they were many times more expensive. The closer they got to the city, the more people they saw. There were middle-aged men with big bellies running on the road in the morning, but they would stop after running for a while to catch their breath. There were children playing football on the grass, laughing and chatting non-stop. The morning sun was still far above the mountains, blocked by the thick crust of the Earth. Most of the city was still in darkness, but self-illumination was extremely developed. The buildings in the city were much taller than those of the New Era Institute and the underground neighborhood. The buildings with dozens or even hundreds of floors could be seen everywhere, but they were insignificant in comparison to the skyscrapers with thousands of floors on the main planet of the Federation and the space cities connected to the ground by the space elevators he had seen on TV. Back when the distant ancient civilization remodeled this planet, they hollowed out the Earth's mantle and built countless working platforms in it. Those platforms were where most of the humans lived. Restricted by the space, the buildings couldn't be too tall. Walking on the quiet street, Jingjiu looked at the women with their dogs and the middle-aged men who were watching the news with their hands waving in the air. No emotion could be detected on his face under the hood. This place was indeed a bit different from the underground neighborhood, but the difference was not so great that it was essentially the same as the cities in Chaotian. The sun had finally passed over the Earth's crust and arrived above the city, illuminating all the streets and windows. The whole city had gradually woken up. Jingjiu rode the floating train to the center of the city by using his bracelet. Looking at the undulating streets and the residential houses hidden in the woods, he decided where he would go first. The JBI Opera House was the largest and most famous opera house on the Stargate planet, where many operas were performed every day. It was still early in the morning, but the residents of the city, who were dressed appropriately, gathered here. They passed through the passage under the pond and entered the opera house one after another. Jingjiu followed the crowd to the ticket booth. He reached out his bracelet and placed it in front of the sensor. Following a beep, a man in formal clothing came over and said reverently, "Hello, distinguished guest. Please come this way." There were many spectators for the opera that day, and there were only a few VIP tickets left. It was natural for him to choose one of them. He learned the importance of money when he traveled the human world with Zhao Liu, and he also learned that expensive things were always better than cheap things. The seats for the distinguished guests were indeed different from the others. Leaning against the soft and strong imitation leather seat, Jingjiu looked at the actors singing passionately on the stage, thinking that Lu Shui should learn this skill if he could ascend. This opera was adapted from a story about knights. The story was a common one, such as family, country, hatred, and the separation of loved ones. However, it was said that this story about knights was excavated by the female priests from the distant ancient civilization. As a result, the story in this world had a more sacred feeling. The audience didn't laugh out loud even though the lines and plot were quite interesting. They put their palms together, their faces displaying a devout expression. The acoustical design of the opera house was perfect, much better than the sound system of the television in Zhong Lizi's house. Jingjiu could only find 3 points that could be improved. After listening to the opera for 10 minutes, Jingjiu felt that he had accumulated enough knowledge and experience, so he left the JBI Opera House. He walked back through the passage under the pond and went to the other side of the street, which was quieter. The other side of the street was the Stargate Museum and a few other well-designed buildings. To experience a civilization, the museum was the best choice. Though Jingjiu had read about the unearthed relics on the internet, it was different to see them with his own eyes. The smell of the oily mud on the mechanical guns, the smell of the gasoline on the old cars, and the smell of the tobacco on the paper books, was something he could sense even though he couldn't smell it. Of course, he had a more important purpose for coming here. Walking into the museum, Jingjiu walked at a speed 5 times faster than a regular visitor. Soon, he had walked past the exhibition rooms of the modern era and the star chain, but he didn't miss any details of the exhibits. It didn't take long before he came to the largest and most spacious hall in the museum. The exhibits of the distant ancient civilization were displayed in this hall. Of course, they were replicas of them. To put it more precisely, they were imagined. The remnants of the distant ancient civilization were all in the hands of the female priests. To say nothing of the museum, the hidden network didn't have many records of them. It was evident that the humans in the Federation of the Milky Way had no knowledge of their ancestors from the distant ancient times, and they lacked imagination. The exhibits on display were basically exaggerated versions of the modern technology. Realizing this, Jingjiu didn't linger. He came to the end of the hall, opened a wooden door, and walked down the stairs. The third underground floor of the museum looked like a common storeroom without any anti-theft measures, nor did it have an alloy door as thick as a wall as commonly seen in the movies. The light on the stairs was dim, reaching out to the dark storeroom and illuminating the figure of Jingjiu. Standing on the same spot, Jingjiu called out the map in his sea of awareness and compared it with the storeroom. Soon after, he had ascertained the location and flew over. It was a wooden shelf about 3 meters high, lying in a corner casually. Jingju landed on the highest level of the wooden shelf and pressed his hand against the wall, sensing the details of the structure inside. This was a very hard alloy wall. It wouldn't be a problem for him to break it open given his current strength, but it would take him some time and alert the monitoring system. The monitoring system and the control system of this hidden storeroom were independent and not connected to the network. Jingju didn't think for too long. His fingertip had already pierced into the wall with a sizzling sound. With a series of clicking sounds, the monitoring system had sunk into a swamp in a place he couldn't see. It would only record images according to his thoughts. At the same time, the extremely complicated 36-axis lock code in the alloy wall was cracked and unlocked. The wall had just opened a small gap when he floated in and stopped the opening of the wall. Behind the alloy wall was a dry and empty space. Incandescent light shone on every corner, just like the operating room of a hospital. There was a metal door inside, surrounded by an even stronger high-polymer composite wall. There was nothing else on the metal door. There was no iris, fingerprint, or identification. There was only a keyhole. Humans living in an era of advanced technology knew very well that this seemingly simple physical lock was the real safe lock. There was no need to worry about any data intrusion. Even the most powerful cloud ghost in the Alliance couldn't open it. Jingju welcomed this knowledge very much. He aimed his finger at the keyhole. A soft sound rang out, as if mercury was pouring into an extremely complicated passageway. The heavy alloy door made a muffled sound and the lock was unlocked. Jingju pushed the door open and walked in. He saw a cube about 10 meters high in front of him. The cube was made of a transparent material. It looked like a large square glass jar, through which he could see the objects inside clearly. There was a great deal of soil in the glass case. There was an old and shabby mecha buried in the soil. Its surface was mottled and its paint was gone. It was hard to tell what color it used to be. It was evident that this old mecha was discovered in the soil. The Stargate Museum or the government was worried that it wouldn't be preserved well, so they brought it here along with the soil in the surroundings and sealed it up. This should be a remnant of the distant ancient civilization. While thinking of this, Jingju walked to the front of the huge glass case. His body looked rather small compared to the glass case. The contrast was even more obvious in the empty storeroom. Jingju fell silent for a long time while looking at the old mecha half buried in the soil. The old mecha was also looking at him silently. Chapter 782. Jingju didn't know the remains of the distant ancient civilization were hidden in the Stargate Museum, though it was often shown in the movies. There were no records about the distant ancient civilization in the interplanetary network and the hidden network. The female priests who inherited the distant ancient civilization didn't go online, and the database of the Science Academy was protected by a physical barrier. Even Jingju couldn't find any clues, let alone the others. The descriptions of the distant ancient civilization on TV and in books were merely conjectures. There was no archaeological evidence. Many people in the Federation even suspected that the so-called distant ancient civilization was a hoax set up by the government to provide the populace with a sense of security. Seeing the mecha buried in the mud that day, Jingju of course knew it was not a hoax, and that the distant ancient civilization did exist. The reason he could find this well-hidden storeroom was that he had checked the map on the internet before coming to the museum and compared it with the construction plan of the museum 300 years ago, finding some strange places. He found more information while listening to the opera, including the amount of high-strength alloy used in the construction of the museum. Finally, he confirmed that there must be a hidden storeroom here, and he also found the location of the storeroom. He walked out of the museum and came to the square. Looking at the people and the fat pigeons who were sunbathing, and thinking of the Mecca that would never see the light of day, he turned around and walked toward the nearby art gallery after a moment of silence. Similar to the museum, the real objects were quite different from the pictures on TV and the internet. Those e-books couldn't retain the soared wills and energy of the original authors, but the authentic works could. The pictures on TV and the internet were all flat, so it was impossible to see the mountains piled up by the paints and the traces of the author's trembling hands. How could one tell if the author was excited at the sight of the morning sun outside the window when he put down the brush, or if he was sad at the approaching dusk? Jingjiu walked past those paintings at a normal speed, but his speed was quite unusual in the art gallery, attracting many people's attention. He didn't care much about it. Eventually, he stopped in front of a painting for a long time. It was a painting of sunflowers. At least a dozen sunflowers filled the entire canvas, leaving no gap. The onlookers felt suffocated just by looking at it. In many aspects, this painting didn't conform to the definition of aesthetics, and it could easily make the onlookers feel uncomfortable. However, in the history of art, this painting had a very high status, because the painter was a priestess of the main star. It was said that she had copied a painting left behind from ancient times. Whether the rumor was true or not, no one knew. People only knew that after leaving this painting, the priestess passed away. More and more spectators gathered in front of the sunflower, gradually forming a black circle, surrounding Jingjiu in the middle. He could hear the whispers of the crowd as well. No one dared to make any negative comments on the famous painting left by the priestess. They just cautiously expressed that they did not understand and tried to make their own understanding. Jingjiu looked at the painting in silence. Suddenly, he felt that the sunflowers should have been bound by something at the beginning. It could have been a cloth band or a rope. Otherwise, the dozen or so sunflowers, which were obviously dehydrated, would have fallen in all directions instead of standing firmly in the bottle. What was holding the sunflowers in place? Why didn't the priestess draw it? Or did she not keep it when she copied it? Strolling on the streets around the square, Jingjiu was in a good mood as he watched the sunlight refracted into various shapes before his eyelashes. He was indeed strolling. Apart from accompanying Lien Sanyue to play in various counties and going back to Aoyama twice for inspection, today was the slowest day for him. The reason he was in a good mood was not because he had seen the Mecca and the painting of the sunflowers, nor because of the people sunbathing on the grass, the children playing and the dogs, nor because of the happy and joyful atmosphere pervading this world. It was because he was satisfied with the speed of the internet. The upper-class society was, after all, an upper-class society. Besides the happy atmosphere, there were various wireless signals in the air, and the data channels were very wide. He didn't need to go to the library of the New Era Institute to surf the internet like he had done in the underground world. He could sense the boundless starry sky by reaching out his finger. For the sake of safety, he didn't connect to the internet directly, but if he inserted his finger into the silvery white computer while walking around, he would draw the attention and sympathy of some people. As such, he decided to make a repeater and filter for himself. This city was called the Big District of Shou-Er City, located between the crust and the Great Rift Valley in the middle of the planet. It was divided into 11 districts administratively. The district Jingjiu intended to go to had a few largest electronic companies on this planet, and there were many nameless electronic component companies in the remote street. As a gentle breeze blew over, Jingjiu walked out from the most remote gate of the floating railway station, and his way was blocked by someone. "I want a 7th-level universal teleporter. How much is it?" Jingjiu didn't know what the other party intended to do, but he didn't pay any attention to it. He walked sideways and disappeared at the other end of the street. When he walked on the streets of Ojianji district, he finally understood what had just happened. On the dark side of the street, there were many young people standing around. They were all wearing hooded sweatshirts, covered their faces, and carrying black backpacks. When they met tourists or passers-by, they would ask them in a low voice if they wanted a cracker. The Federation of the Milky Way had loosened its control over the Internet, especially among the upper class. There were many ways to crack the Internet barrier, and the government didn't pay much attention to it. Jingju didn't need a cracker. He lifted his head and looked at the building in front of him. After ascertaining that it was the network security company he was looking for, he took out the computer and used it to crack the technical barrier of the company in a short time. He created a brand new identity for himself in the core area of the company and wrote the data and characteristics into the bracelet. Jingju walked into the network security company. The lady at the front desk was a bit alarmed when she saw his outfit, wondering why these guys who sold crackers came here. She informed the security guards and asked them to keep an eye on this place. Jingju didn't know that the clothes make the man, nor did he know that he had attracted the attention of the other party. He came before the screen door and raised his bracelet to touch the scanner softly. Along with a faint beep, the screen door opened automatically. The lady at the front desk felt surprised. She waved her hand to signal for the security guards to leave, wondering if a big shot in the network security department had gone crazy after staying up all night to deal with the public affairs. He wanted to go out and experience his previous life as a salesman. A few minutes later, Jingju walked out from the back door of the network security company. Looking at the ring on his left forefinger, he nodded satisfactorily. This ring was the relay filter he needed. It was very light and inconspicuous, and it kept in contact with his skin to ensure that he wouldn't be disconnected from the Internet. Jingju had easily collected all the necessary electronic components from the network security company according to the drawings and information he had found on the Internet. He spent a few minutes assembling the device. He had done it very carefully, and he believed that there was no better product available for the civilians in the Federation of the Milky Way. Standing in the shadow of the building, Jingju looked no different from those young people wearing similar clothes, except that he looked a bit lazy. He lifted his head to take a look at the sky and found that the small red fireball had almost reached the center of the sky. He decided to find Zhonglizi first. It was because he thought that the snow girl might kill Zhonglizi if she didn't find him in the book and thought it was a trap. If she were someone else who had ascended, she wouldn't be so ruthless and try to kill Zhonglizi as soon as she arrived. She would ask the question first before doing anything, but the temperament of the snow girl was, these humans were no different than ants in her eyes. Who could tell what she would do? The girl with silvery hair had been hanging out with him for some time. It was inappropriate for her to die for no apparent reason. A map appeared in front of his eyes, on which the locations of the universities in Shou or city were clearly marked. The branch of the University of Stargate occupied a large piece of land in the easternmost part of the city, with its back against the majestic mountain range formed naturally by the Earth's crust. It overlooked the whole city and the underground world under the Great Rift Valley. Jingju took the floating railway to the west of the city. It didn't take long before he arrived at the side gate of the University of Stargate and saw the building indicated in the message sent by Zhonglizi. The building was white in color, with a large terrace on each floor, and a blue swimming pool under the terrace. Each terrace had a low door so that the guests could jump into the swimming pool from the top. The guests who could stay here must have achieved a high cultivation, so they didn't care about the height. This hotel looked exceedingly luxurious from the outside. It was different from the hotels attached to the universities described on TV and in the novels. It looked more like a holiday village. Walking on the path surrounded by the tropical trees and looking at the men and women in bath towels, Jingju had a stronger feeling. He raised his right hand and patted on a large tree. Glancing at the blue sky and white clouds that seemed to be lower than those in the city, he walked into the lobby of the hotel. Like what the network security company did, The employee of the hotel was taken aback when he saw Jingjiu's outfit, but his attitude was much better. He approached him with a smile and asked if he needed any help. Jingjiu didn't need any help, nor was he willing to talk to anyone. He ignored the employee and walked into the elevator, placing the bracelet on the sensor. There was another soft beep. The employee let out an apologetic smile and retreated to one side while bowing slightly. The maglev elevator went up noiselessly at a high speed, but it didn't cause any discomfort to the passengers. Outside the transparent material were the receding woods and swimming pool, the approaching blue sky and white clouds, and a large lake that could be seen more clearly in the distance. Many residents of City would spend a lot of money to dine on the top floor of this hotel on the Memorial Day. It was mostly because of this beautiful scenery. Jingjiu didn't even take a look at it. He lowered his head to look at his own hands. It was unclear what he was doing. The elevator stopped on the 99th floor. Jingjiu came before the door of the room. He first overwrote the data in the surveillance system, and then raised his right hand. He didn't ring the doorbell, but put the bracelet on the sensor. It was still a soft beep. The door of the room was opened noiselessly. Jingjiu walked in. Standing before the floor-to-ceiling window, and looking at the beautiful scenery outside, Zonglizi was wrapped in a bath towel. It was evident that she had just taken a bath. "Put this on," said Jingjiu as he came behind her. Zonglizi was startled and almost screamed out loud. She covered her mouth with her hand when she heard Jingjiu's voice. Jingjiu handed the object to her and said, "Tie it around your neck. Don't lose it." Zonglizi took the object and asked, "What is this?" Jingjiu patted the big tree outside the hotel and took out a piece of wood from it. He made a wooden sculpture in the floating elevator. "If you are in danger, show them this," said Jingjiu. Zonglizi was aware that Jingjiu had a mysterious background. She thought that this might be a clan emblem or a keepsake for the descendants of an aristocratic clan. Feeling moved, "I'll keep it well." Looking at the wooden sculpture, she asked confusedly, "But why is it a chair?" Ding! Ding! Warning! You can turn to Tencent Video and iQIYI Video. The TV series of the anniversary of the Qing dynasty is being broadcasted at the moment. The circle of friends has been flooded with messages. Thank you very much. I'm eating skewers outside to celebrate. Chapter 783. There was no way to explain it, and the explanation required 2 million words, even though she was the author of the 2 million words in name. Jingjiu walked toward the outside of the room after finding that the soft chair on the deck seemed to be a good place to lie on. Zonglizi followed him and was about to ask him something more when she suddenly remembered her current appearance. She turned around and entered the bedroom hastily with a blush on her face. Soon after, she came out from the bedroom and changed into a pajama. Her silvery hair was slightly damp, and her eyes and brows were thin and beautiful, looking like a white cat. "How did you get up here?" she asked while sitting on the other end of the soft chair and looking at Jingjiu. She was aware that this youth had a mysterious background, but she was still curious about him. Jingjiu had been walking around in City for a whole day. Though he didn't feel tired, he still felt a bit tired. He didn't pay any attention to her with his eyes closed. Zonglizi had been feeling nervous since she came here the day before. She was quite happy to see Jingjiu, so she didn't mind his ignoring her. She suddenly asked, "What did you see earlier?" The scenery on the deck was indeed marvelous. They could see the lake called the Caspian Sea in the distance, but she didn't ask about the scenery. Nothing. Jingjiu didn't have much knowledge about daily life, but he had some knowledge about it. He knew that he couldn't tell her what he had seen even though he had seen it. In fact, he had seen everything in the apartment building. Lying on the soft chair, he would look at her to relieve his boredom when he needed to relax. He saw her pose in the blue camisole and the tight pants, and the sweat beads trickling down from her neck. He stood by the bed when she was sick, and his gaze penetrated the quilt and clothes and went deep into her body. Zhong Lizi felt disappointed that her flirting didn't work. "This suite was booked by the Twirling Rain Company," she said. "The person named Gao Shu said that I could live here whenever I wanted during the development of the game, instead of going to the dormitory at the university." Jingju uttered Zhong Lizi continued, "I'm going to the University of Stargate to register tomorrow. Do you want to go with me?" "Well, it's fine if it's not convenient." Jingju opened his eyes and glanced at her. He found that she was sitting in the seat that Zhao Liu was most used to. He uttered after some thought. "What should we do about the game company? I don't know anything." "You can sign it yourself. There won't be any problems over there. You have to make them faster and better. The most important thing is to expand the scope of promotion. It can't be limited to the Stargate." It was rare to hear Jingju speak so much, so Zhong Lizi felt even more nervous. She clenched her fists reflexively, trying to cheer herself up. Jingju was about to close his eyes and continue reading the thesis when he suddenly sensed something. He raised his eyebrows and looked out of the balcony. Other than the blue sky and white clouds outside the terrace, there was only the lake, and the city was far away on the other side of the lake. There was a building in the distance that exuded an aura that he did not like. He asked, "Where is that?" "I can't see clearly." Zhong Lizi squinted her eyes for a long time. Jingju found that his mind was a little unstable. He actually asked her this question, which made him feel even worse. He took out the map and confirmed the name of the building. The administrative bureau of the Federation stationed at the Stargate base had a higher administrative level and status than the Stargate base. Was the energy he didn't like the gravitational field? But what about the building next to it? Why did it make him a little uncomfortable? Jingju got up and said, "I'm going out to take care of something." Zhong Lizi was startled, wondering why he wanted to leave so soon after coming here. In the next moment, she thought that Jingju was a native of this world, so he must have some old subordinates to contact. "Be careful," she said earnestly. Jingju uttered There was indeed a gravitational field in the administrative bureau of the Federation government stationed at the Stargate base, but the unpleasant feeling had nothing to do with it. Standing on the other side of the street, Jingju made this judgment while looking at the majestic building across from him. He turned around and walked to another building not far away. This building had a majestic and sacred aura. It was called the Fire-Passing Pagoda, which had 6 floors. It was the place where the believers prayed to their ancestors and prayed to the god. There was only one religion in the Federation of the Milky Way, so it had no name. For the same reason, the god had no name. Many believers came to the Fire-Passing Pagoda. They knelt on the ground around the building, praying to the gods devoutly and muttering all sorts of prayers. Thanks to the information on the internet, Jingju knew that he could visit the pagoda as he wished. He registered his visit with the bracelet and walked in. The big trees on the street extended their branches and green leaves, half covering the windows of the building. The mottled sunlight shone through the windows, looking rather beautiful. The murals in the building depicted the dark clouds, the strange but splendid battleships, and the gods with no specific faces. In his eyes, these murals were better than those paintings in the art gallery. It was probably because the paintings in the art gallery were more modern, except for the painting of the sunflower. Jingju thought that he might be getting old. He came to the main hall of the Fire-Passing Pagoda after walking through the domed corridor full of murals. He could hear the chanting coming out from the crack of the door like running water without pushing the door open. Standing outside the door, Jingju listened to the chanting in silence. He found that the chanting was similar to those murals, all praising the gods and the distant ancient civilization. As he was about to leave, a voice burst out behind him. "The dark night is over there, ready to swallow all the light in the world. But we don't need to worry because the gods have already arranged everything. Jingju wanted to leave because he knew someone was approaching, but he didn't expect the speaker to speak so quickly. It was a typical sermon. Jingju ignored it and turned around to walk out of the building. It was probably because the main preacher had never seen such indifferent people in the fire-passing pagoda before he came back to his senses and followed Jingju in a hurry. Jingju didn't expect the main preacher to follow him all the way from the building to the street, saying something along the way. It was then that the indicator light of the pedestrian passage on the street lit up. Jingju halted his steps. The main preacher caught up to him and said while panting, "Believe in God. It's not God's need, but our need." Jingju took a look at the indicator light, and it went off immediately. A few floating cars had just started up when they found the indicator light had changed. They stopped immediately and almost crashed into each other. The crowd on the opposite side of the street was taken aback for a moment, and then they walked toward him like a tide. Jingju looked at the crowd and said, "I'm God." The main preacher was taken aback for a moment to make sure he didn't mishear him. "No. God is the only one," he said with an odd expression on his face. Jingju walked into the crowd. The huge whale surfaced on the surface of the sea. Jingju walked out of the crowd. He returned to the square between the museum and the art gallery. The terrain here was spacious enough, so the crowd became sparser. They were sitting on the lawn or on the benches in twos and threes, feeding the pigeons and playing with the flying machines. The uncomfortable feeling appeared in his mind again. He walked to the edge of the lawn and looked at the pigeon droppings under his feet. After a moment of silence, he turned around and looked into the distance. The majestic mountain range in the west glowed in a warm red color under the illumination of the permanent star. The gravitational field generators that were as bright as the stars were not so eye-catching. It didn't take long for him to capture the source of the energy. His sword-like eyesight got closer and finally fixed on a deep hole in the mountain range. There was a man in overalls, carrying a toolbox with him. The toolbox was painted with the codes and names of the relevant departments. If someone saw him, they would definitely think he was a government maintenance worker. The man in overalls was lying on the ground. The toolbox was already open, and the parts of the instruments inside were assembled into a metal object. The metal object was at least 1.5 meters long, and the diameter of the long tube in front was about 1.7 centimeters. There were more than 20 rings on the outer wall. The rings were shining with a dark blue light, but it was unclear whether it was electric current or some other kind of fluctuation. It was obvious that this was a powerful long-range firearm. Separated by 70 kilometers, Jingju was still sure that he was the target. He could clearly see the black hole of the gun barrel and the eye behind the optical magnifier. In a very short time, he saw many characteristics of the metal gun, and at the same time, many terms appeared in his mind. Electromagnetism, ring strengthening, cluster, non-chemical expansion. Just as these terms flashed in his mind, Jingju suddenly raised his right hand, spread his fingers, and pointed his palm into the distance. His movement was so fast that a gust of wind blew up some grass chips, startling the pigeons and making them fly away. The people on the lawn looked at him, wondering where this weirdo came from or a performance artist. It was then that a violent explosion burst out on the lawn. Boom! The grass chips flew everywhere along with the dust, obscuring the view. The pigeons flew everywhere while squawking, creating a chaotic scene. The crowd was astonished, and they stood up and fled to the distance. The watering machine on the lawn sensed it and started spraying water mist. The smoke and dust were extinguished at a visible speed. Standing in the drizzling water mist, Jingju pulled back his right hand and opened his palm. A dark blue object resembling an ink block appeared in his palm. It was the residue of the explosion of a high-explosive bullet. This kind of bullet was a prohibited item in the Federation of the Milky Way, and only a few troops on the front line were equipped with it. A high-explosive bullet fired by a gun strengthened by electromagnetism could destroy a building like the fire-passing pagoda. Jingju scattered the powder on the lawn and shook his hand, feeling a bit numb. He thought that the data in the hidden network was correct, and this kind of long-range firearm was indeed very powerful. The TV series in the last years of the Qing dynasty are quite good, as powerful as Jingjiu. I recommend you to watch it. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.